And second, one of the main things about this event is a discussion with the community. So please use the Q&A function to put in questions from the panelists. And we really look forward to hearing from you. So in terms of the structure of the event, there's going to be 4 panels. And each of the panels aligns with an IDOOS working group. So DOOS was recently awarded funded through the NSF ExcelNet program for a project that we're calling Implementing DOOS, or IDOOS. And within that program, there are 3 working groups. So each panel aligns with a different working group. And the reason this is important is that we are looking for members of the community to be a part of these working groups. So if you enjoy one of the discussion topics today and you want to be a part of the working group, please email us at info@deepoceanobserving.org. And this project is going to kick off this fall. So first up, we'll have a panel on societal needs and scientific gaps in the deep ocean. And then we'll have a panel on deep ocean biological modeling. And for those of you who were up earlier today, this is a continuation of the Challenger 150 event this morning. Third panel is gaps in technological development. And the fourth panel is an early career panel where we'll be looking at where we wish to see the deep ocean in 10 years. And this is in collaboration with the UN Decade Early Career Program. So very quickly, just to put in the plug for the Doers program, which is the early career program of IDOOS. If you're interested, please send me an email. I have my email on this slide. It's a professional development program. We're looking for a cohort of 50 to 60 people from around the world. It's meant to be diverse, inclusive, and cross-disciplinary. And we'll be holding quarterly professional development events. So we really look forward to having you all be a part of it. So here's our brief timing of our agenda. And without further ado, I will kick it off to Lisa from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. She is a co-lead on the DOOS project and is also our DOOS Decade lead, and she will be telling you more about DOOS.
Thank you. Good day, everybody. You can hear me okay, Leslie? Yeah. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes introducing the Deep Ocean Observing Strategy, or DOOS. This is a globally integrated network of networks to observe the deep ocean effectively in support of science policy and planning for sustainable oceans. Next, please. There are, as I think this audience understands, there are many different motivations for observing the deep ocean, and I've illustrated some of them here. The deep ocean is very closely tied to the surface ocean and to the atmosphere, and as a result to the climate on the planet and to climate change. And we need to better represent the deep ocean in models and our understanding in general. We have a need for biodiversity observations to enhance and build baselines. One of the reasons we need this baseline understanding is because there is an expansion of resource extraction in the deep ocean in the form of deep sea fishing, oil and gas extraction. There's a growing offshore wind energy industry, and as well as seabed mining, which is emerging. We need those biodiversity baselines to inform conservation planning and to enable our ability to meet sustainable development goals. We also need deep ocean observations to inform on hazards and how to predict them and adapt to them. Deep ocean has a number of hazards. Next slide, please. The concept of DOOS emerged back in 2011, so a decade ago, but it really got off the ground in 2016 when there was a deep ocean observing inventory that was held, and a scoping workshop that had about 50 scientists come together to build what we have today as DOOS. Over the next few years, there were a variety, a steering committee was formed, and there were a variety of town halls, and the community prepared a science and implementation guide, as well as a white paper for ocean obs. And then, as you heard that Leslie said, IDOOS was awarded as an NSF ExcelNet program just this year, and it really technically begins next month. Next, please. So what is DEUCE? It's an international community-based group that coordinates deep observing to understand the state of the global deep ocean with respect to baseline conditions, response to climate change, and response to human disturbance. DEUCE is a GOOSE project that focuses on the deeper part of the ocean, below 200 meters, but with an emphasis even deeper. And just this year, DEUCE was endorsed as a UN decade program. Next, please. Who belongs to DEUCE? Well, here I have listed the different networks that are partners of IDEUCE. There are observing and exploration networks, data and modeling, cyber infrastructure networks, and management and policy agencies as well. If you belong to a group that does deep ocean observing and you don't see yourself listed in one of these, please do, and you engage in some form of deep ocean mapping or exploration, modeling or observing, please do contact us so that we can engage you. We hope to link these networks to industry and to government groups, in part through our involvement with the decade, to address a whole host of societal issues related to fisheries, climate, mining, sustainability, biodiversity, and more. Next, please. So this slide is an attempt to illustrate how DEUCE works, what the elements are. And the scientific questions and societal mandates were initially discussed at the 2016 scoping workshop, but they continue to evolve, of course, as society changes and the climate changes. A key element of DEUCE is designating essential ocean variables. We work with the GOOSE panels on physics, biogeochemistry, and biology and ecology to do this as part of requirement setting. DEUCE works with a host of different networks and programs, works towards implementing fair data principles, and the implementation of integrated observing, we hope to initiate through a series of demonstration projects in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, in the Azores, and in the Northeast Pacific, with the idea of showing how different kinds of observing can come together to inform policy. So the ultimate goals or outcomes we seek are a healthy ocean, the next generation of deep sea observations, a sustainable blue economy, and increased capacity for deep observing globally. Next. So as Leslie mentioned, we are trying to advance DEUCE through IDEUCE, or implementing DEUCE, and you've already heard about the 3 working groups. The requirement setting working group, in addition to tackling essential ocean variables for the deep and their specifications, will coordinate with the modeling community to see what observing needs to be done to inform models. It will work to develop and promote best practices in observing and data. The second working group, the implementation group, will create roadmaps for observers to contribute globally. It will address technology readiness levels, and as I mentioned, work through demonstration projects. And the third theme or working group is the group that works to translate scientific understanding and data to management and policy. We hope to raise awareness among policymakers through the creation of briefs and other outreach materials and interactions. And this group will represent DEUCE. Well, this group will make sure that DEUCE is represented in UN decade activities to achieve this translation. So there are a number of cross-cutting themes. Leslie mentioned the Early Career Researchers Program doers that will really go across all these working groups and hopefully provide some leadership within these working groups. And then we have the Data and Informatics Task Team in DEUCE that is providing working group support, early career researcher trainings, hackathon, and more. So we encourage you, as Leslie said, to get involved with IDEUCE. You can email us at info@deepoceanobserving.org. Next slide, please. So to move into our agenda now, I'd like to, I'll be the moderator along with Leslie for panel 1 on societal needs and scientific gaps in the deep ocean. Next, please. And Leslie, I don't think we need, we've been, have you been introduced? Forget already. Do we need to introduce ourselves, or can I go ahead and just introduce our panelists?
Go ahead and introduce our panelists. I think you and I have both been introduced. So.
Okay, great. So we have a wonderful panel, 6 people with very diverse backgrounds and interests. And I'm going to ask each of them to spend just 2 minutes introducing themselves and their expertise and addressing one of these questions. So we have Luciana Genio. Oh, sorry, go back, please. I need that slide and I'm going to talk about the questions. We have Luciana Genio from ISA, Mandy Joy from the University of Georgia, Baylor Fox Kemper from Brown University, Craig Smith from the University of Hawaii, Rishi Sharma from FAO, and Emilia Bravo from CONICET in Argentina. And I've asked them to consider at least one of these 3 questions. What types of deep observing do you think are most urgently needed by society, given present technology, and why and where? What new capabilities should society work to develop in the coming decade? Or how can we best connect research scientists to the needs of regulators, policymakers, and civil society? And I'm just going to call on each of you individually. Remember, 2 minutes, please. And Luciana, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you very much, Lisa. And yeah, I can start by saying my name is Luciana Genio, and I'm the environmental analyst at the Secretariat of the International Seabed Authority. You can read more about me at the biography provided on the event webpage. So Leslie, can you get the second? Thank you very much. So I would like just to start recalling that the importance of promoting and encouraging marine scientific research in the area has been acknowledged and reflected in by the members of the authority in the strategic plan and high-level action plan for the period of 2019 to 2023, and most recently in the ISA action plan in support of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which I will explain a little further in the next slide. Thank you, Leslie, if you can. So this plan, and to address one of the questions that was asked to this panel, I would like to mention that through this action plan, which outlines 6 strategic research priorities, and I'm not going to go into the details now, but I'm happy to further expand on those, is the framework of the ISA to establish and promote strategic alliances and partnerships among all stakeholders in order to improve the synergies and mobilize resources that can allow us to further address the scientific knowledge gaps and inform policy and decision-making processes related to activities in the area. Can you pass to the second one, please? I briefly introduce some thoughts into the second question by mentioning that in the context of ISA, it is important for us to address region-specific needs, and in this sense, through coordinated scientific programs with the scientific communities, along with the work of ISA contractors in their exploration activities. And as we heard from Lisa, we are starting some discussions in terms of developing a demonstration project for the Clarion-Clipperton zone to expand ocean observing and monitoring, which will allow us to improve baseline knowledge as well as understanding potential cumulative impacts, including effects of climate change at the regional level. And the next one, please. So just to finalize, and the third question, I wanted to just briefly mention that we acknowledge increasing advancing in non-invasive technologies for biodiversity assessment, including video and image surveys, as well as environmental DNA. which we believe will make a great improvement in the understanding of biological communities in the deep sea. But I would like to stress that the importance for these methods to be effective and used at a wider scale, we will need to have coordinated reference, standardized reference catalogs that can allow a better understanding of and the exchange of data for understanding those new growing data that is being generated by these methodologies. So I'd like to mention that the ISA has become now the first UN body to serve as a node to the IUCN Ocean Biodiversity Information System. And these efforts, we hope, will certainly help us expand our knowledge in biodiversity and biogeography, which will also allow us to gain better understanding of ecosystem functions and ultimately understanding better the response of ecosystems to human and natural disturbances. Thank you very much. I hope I was brief, and I'm happy to answer any more questions lately.
Thank you, Luciana. Okay, I'm going to ask people, that was probably 3.5 minutes or so to 3 minutes. So please be brief. And Rishi, can I call on you next? He
sure,
has.
Yeah, just 1 second. You wanted me to share my screen, right? So
yes.
I'm going to go quickly. I'm basically going to cover, again, like Luciana mentioned, you can find out more about me. I'm a senior fisheries resource officer at FAO, and I deal with some of my responsibilities are dealing with the deep sea ABNJ projects, which involve tuna and deep sea resources. I also have other responsibilities related to survey vessel finance and its design and use of information. I come from a background of science and assessment, so I have tried to focus my answers to 2 things, and this is primarily related to the first question: what types of deep sea observation systems do you think are most urgently needed, and why and where? And I'll bring basically people to an event that occurred way back, and this is related to sort of disaster management systems. There was a complete failure of any kind of predictive system to predict this tsunami, which had huge impacts on lives and livelihoods, and for like almost a decade. So having systems really which could monitor tectonic activity, things in the open ocean, which might create catastrophes that would be first and utmost in terms of what human needs and society might want. Secondary effect is having monitoring systems that can actually relate to sort of climatic changes, because those have huge impacts, as the next slide, where this is off the coast of Peru, and you can see over a scale of 20-25 years how the sort of the ocean circulation patterns, which are in response to ENSO patterns, are changing, and how a fishery in the top panel, which was non-existent back in 1990, is now massive, and there's a huge impact to the community at large. So having the ability to relate how things change from the deep ocean to the surface ocean to an ecosystem and how it affects communities is also super important. I'll leave it at that, and we can go on to whatever else people want to talk about. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Amelia, could you go next, please?
Hello, I'm a marine ecologist. I work at CONICET, University of Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm a co-leader of the Offshore Energy Working Group of DOSI. Thank you, Lisa and Leslie, for letting me participate and for learn from all of you. I choose the second question: what new capabilities should society work to develop in the coming decades? Because I am the I am a panelist from a developing country, and I think that I can answer that question. I believe that we need the industrial and scientific decolonization of developing countries, which cover most of the global south. For example, developed countries should require the same high environmental standards for industries, both inside and outside their frontiers. And in the case of science decolonization, I think that it can be done by true collaboration with local scientists. For example, when developed countries conduct at-sea expeditions in developing countries, the local scientists should participate and co-publicate and be part of the decision-making process. Also, it would be good to have an equity quota in the scientific editorials toward an equal access to high impact publications for scientists from developing countries. And I think that this is not an altruistic strategy. Only local scientists know the social economic context to base feasible management policies in their exclusive economic zones. And finally, I think that to face the challenges of the deep sea, we need to think out of the status quo. And for example, this can be done by learning and integrating the alternative social vision provided by indigenous people. That's all, thank you.
I think we may have lost Lisa. We will carry on. Baylor, you're up next.
Hi there, I'm Baylor Fox-Kemper. I'm an oceanographer, climate modeler, and a professor at Brown University. I was the one of the 3 coordinating lead authors of the Ocean Cryosphere and Sea Level chapter of the recent IPCC 6th Assessment Report. In that report and in the publications that it assessed, the observed and projected ocean heat content changes are reviewed. Over the rest of the 21st century, likely ocean warming is going to range from 2 to 4 times under low emissions to 4 to 8 times under high emissions, what we saw from 1971 to 2018, which was about 0.3 to 0.6 yotta-joules of extra energy in the Earth system. Ocean reanalyses support the findings of that continued warming, although with the sometimes large ensemble spread. By that, I mean that the ocean reanalyses disagree, particularly in the poorly sampled deep ocean. Ocean warming is important to understand because it dominates the Earth's energy budget. So when the Earth warms up, 91% of what warms up is actually the ocean. About 56% of that is the upper ocean that warms up. And the deep ocean isn't as well sampled as the upper ocean, but in that energy budget, it actually plays a larger role than the energy of melting ice, which is about 3%, heating of the land, which is about 5%, or heating of the atmosphere, which is the one we normally worry about, which is only about 1%. And one key way that the present generations of models and reanalyses disagree is how they store this anomalous energy in the vertical. That's sensitive to parameterizations within the models. It's sensitive to the resolution of the models, like you might expect. It's sensitive to the way that surface processes vary around the Earth. So while we will continue working on the free running models to improve that process representation, having a sustained deep ocean observing system globally will provide truth and data for the assimilated data for those ocean reanalyses. And also, just for the pure joy of exploration, we don't go to the deep ocean very often. It would be great to do it more. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Baylor. All right, Mandy, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Leslie. So my name is Mandy Joy. I'm an oceanographer at the University of Georgia, and I've been working in the deep ocean for over 2 decades. As Lisa mentioned earlier, the deep ocean is intimately and actively connected to the surface ocean, and it serves as both a reactor and a repository. I think of deep ocean environments as complex, adaptive, multi-scale systems where macroscopic properties emerge from the dynamics and evolution of biological organisms across scales and vary as a function of coevolutionary feedbacks. Long-term observing networks that integrate rich data sets describing metaomics approaches in parallel with data sets describing spatial and temporal distributions of biological populations across trophic levels, as well as rates of biogeochemical processes and carbon fluxes, are necessary to reveal the determinants of this biocomplexity in the deep sea and to predict how the coupled ocean systems, surface and deep, respond to future climate change. Obtaining this kind of information is extraordinarily difficult, but it's not impossible. It's within our reach. Integrated ocean observational data sets that allow us to pair ecological theory with metabolic complexity and environmental models are the way to move forward in the future. These sorts of programs are going to require a large stream of funding from various federal governments across the globe. But the technology is there to obtain the information and data that we need to do this. Establishing these observatories at appropriate spatial and temporal scales are obviously a first step. I've worked in the Gulf of Mexico for a very long time, and I'm a little biased towards the importance of this system, especially for the United States and Mexico. But I think it's an ideal system that's heavily human impacted from the oil and gas industry, which is transitioning to wind, as we know, as well as from being a huge fisheries activity basin for all the Gulf Coast states. But generating and applying, these sorts of observatory approaches in the Gulf it's an ideal place because we've already got a lot of platforms in the case of oil platforms that are soon to be many of them abandoned. At any rate, I think one of the big technological challenges moving forward is to develop technologies that allow for real-time data transfer, because it's not just enough to observe long-term patterns. We really need to know when there's been a perturbation or an event-driven dynamic that alters the baseline. These stochastic events are very hard to capture, but they drive a lot of the dynamics that we see downstream, and a lot of the hysteresis in data sets is driven by these short-term variations. So I think the real-time data transfer and then moving towards these large modeling approaches that incorporate artificial intelligence and machine learning, that is what I see as the biggest future need and future challenges in terms of technology and integration. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you. I love that the deep ocean is a reactor and a repository. That's awesome. That's so true. All right, Craig, bring us home. You're our last panelist.
Okay, well, my name's Craig Smith. I'm a professor of oceanography at the University of Hawaii. I've been working in the deep sea for 4 decades, studying places from the equatorial Pacific Ocean down into Antarctica. With human-occupied vehicles, ROVs, ship-based studies, and I've also been involved in the design of marine protected areas, actually some of the first marine protected areas in the deep ocean and international waters, in areas targeted for nodule mining. Now, I agree with everything everybody has said, so a lot of ground has been covered, and I don't want to repeat people. But one of the biggest needs I see is to have long-term observations in ecosystems, deep sea ecosystems that are impacted by human activities, for example, fishing and mining, that are sensitive to climate change and will have substantial changes in ecosystem structure and function from climate change. And also that can be used to observations that can be used to help manage human activities and provide an example of how to manage extractive activities like deep sea mining around the globe. And one particular area that I think is particularly important for an observatory is the Clipperton-Clarion Zone, where this is one of the largest, well, as part of the abyssal ecosystem, which is most of the biosphere, it turns out, most of the biosphere is in the abyssal ocean. And it is an area that is likely to be highly sensitive to climate warming, particularly in the eastern CCZ, which has a well-developed oxygen minimum zone, and changes in that OMZ will affect fisheries and biodiversity in the water column, potentially carbon sequestration. And then it's also an area targeted for seabed mining. And seabed mining may ultimately have one of the largest footprints of any single activity on the Earth. And so it's really important to understand the ecosystems that are targeted for mining or will be in the future, what their baseline conditions are, and monitor how things are changing. Another reason or a rationale for placing an observatory somewhere in the ocean are in locations of biodiversity hotspots. And it turns out the more we study the CCZ, the more we realize, or more it looks like an abyssal biodiversity hotspot. So for a variety of reasons, this is an area that I think could be a lot of benefit to society and to managing human impacts on the globe by obtaining long-term observation. And these could be not in real time, just placing moorings out and measuring a lot of the essential ocean variables with annual servicing of moorings, but it also ultimately the real-time data flow is important, understanding what's happening in real time. For example, if there's an accident from mining or there's an unusual ecosystem event from a massive hurricane, it'd be nice to be able to see some of these changes in real time and respond in timescales that we could understand in more detail what's going on. And in the case of human activities, intervene if there needs to be a suspension of certain kinds of activities. And again, I thank Lisa and Leslie for inviting me to this panel.
All right, thank you, Craig. So for those of you in our audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A box. You guys did a great job briefly introducing yourselves. So we have over 20 minutes to pick your brains. So Rishi submitted a question, and which I'm going to ask you guys, but I'll riff on it a little bit. And because I was thinking about what Mandy was saying about these observatories are going to take a lot of funding, what we need to measure. And Rishi's question is, well, why should people care about the deep sea? And so our whole goal of this panel is looking at societal needs. So my question is, how do you convince people to spend a lot of money on a place very far away that they're never going to go to? How do we convince people that the deep sea is directly related to their lives and that these observing efforts will provide them with direct benefits?
I think Baylor touched on that really well, in that the deep sea is a planetary barometer of I mean, it's so intimately connected. People tend to think of the deep sea as this dissociated, disconnected place that doesn't matter to them. But in fact, there's so many ecosystem services that are provided by the deep sea, and it's a fundamental portion of the Earth ocean system. When you think about timescales, the surface ocean equilibrates with the atmosphere quickly on the timescale of a year. The deep ocean is hundreds of years to 1,000 years. So the timescale is protracted, but the impact is nonetheless there. And how the deep ocean responds and what its limits are really, I think, constrains the ability of the Earth system to respond to climate perturbations.
Great. Amelia, can you answer from the perspective of a developing country about how to, the specific needs of developing country in terms of investing in the deep ocean?
Well, I think that as I answered, we face the colonization, the colonialism, both industrially and scientifically. And that leave us in a place that does not allow us to properly exploit the resources we need for food or to manage the deep sea environment for conservation. So I think that we need a global effort to help us reach the sustainable development of the deep sea in the developing countries. And it's normal that developed countries conduct at-sea expeditions in our countries, but our ability to participate in those expeditions is very limited and often is as observators. So it's from a perspective in which we are not valued as scientists, and we are not really participating on the research process and decision making of these resources. And so yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, thank you. Rishi, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
The realization of the reason I'm asking this is just playing devil's advocate, because I mean, I believe these systems should be there, but for large population globally, it's not on their radar system at all. I mean, people, subsistence livelihoods and people's living conditions are so deplorable that it's sort of a esoteric thing for them to even think about things like this when you can't feed a family of 4, right? I mean, you're looking at huge parts of Asia and Africa where, 30 to 40% of the people are below the poverty line. So why would they care about this? I mean, that's my primary reason. If I can't feed my kids, why should I care what people are doing in the deep ocean? So, I mean, this is where there's a big disconnect between what's going on the global level and what's the reality on the ground. So that's my perspective.
Right, and I can see there being kind of two, when we speak about developing countries here, it's almost like you and Amelia are answering from two different perspectives. You're referring to inland countries, and then Amelia's talking about developing countries with coastline, with deep ocean resources that they want to exploit, that could help.
No, I'm talking about countries with, I mean, a lot of Asia and Africa have a lot of deep ocean coastline and places which you can explore and develop. All of Indonesia, parts of Indonesia, parts of, Somalia, I mean, Madagascar, Mozambique Channel, all those areas are big. Mauritius, places, island nations, the Maldives, all those areas have huge amounts of deep ocean resources, but
yeah,
it's not in a lot of these areas. It's not on their radar at all. So.
Right, and to Amelia's point, it was seeking to empower those local researchers to be a part of the discussion and local economies to benefit instead of this colonialist mentality. Luciana, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I think many good points have already been raised. I think it's just I would like to add on the importance of the deep ocean community and not only the scientific community, but the industry and the governments, bodies, and all members involved on improving the communication and literacy. So I think there's quite a lot of work still to do that and to read. And I think we are having lots more technology and means to bring the deep ocean closer to the people that are not necessarily directly going on the research cruises or being more in close contact with the deep sea, but this role of raising awareness is very important. And I would like also to mention, in particular for the developing countries, that opportunities that ISA has been developing over the years to promote training at sea, but also now hopefully getting more institutional capacity building across the country. So I think this there needs to be all those efforts to not just, even when you do training, not to be just focusing on going to sea once and come back and there's no continuation, but improving these networks. And I think those project is also quite keen in improving these networks and giving more opportunities for early career scientists and continuing developing capacity. So thanks.
Thank you. And I want to read something from our Q&A that came in from the Ocean Discovery League, which is another decade program. And they have been conducting the Global Deep Sea Capacity Assessment, which includes questions about priorities for deep sea issues And they've had 84 developing countries respond, as well as 26 small island developing states. So that's great that we're learning more about that. And for those of you who haven't checked out the Ocean Discovery League, I would recommend checking them out. So our wonderful moderator, Lisa, has joined us again. And we will continue to take some questions from the Q&A. Another one in here is, most of the deep sea is beyond national borders. Are different approaches needed for regions within national EEZs and beyond national EEZs? Lisa, anyone you want to direct this to? Craig's got his hand.
Yeah, Craig, why don't you go ahead?
I think little appreciated fact is that, particularly for things like seabed mineral exploitation, all the countries that have signed on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea have agreed that the environmental regulations they use within their EEZ must be as protective of the environment as those instituted by the ISA. So they're actually, as the ISA works through its exploitation regulations, they are setting an international standard that the countries that have signed that treaty have agreed to adhere to. There are some countries that haven't, including the US. And that is one reason some of the scientists would like to see the US sign it, so that we can adhere to the same standards that the rest of the world is beholden to.
Great. And we have a question from one of our moderators, Justin Stopa. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. This question is directed towards Baylor. You mentioned that the reanalyses, it's important to get the deep ocean correct. What variables in particular are you referring to, and can you comment on the precision needed?
All right. Yes. So I was talking primarily about ocean heat content. I mean, water masses would also have a salinity that would go along with that. So the problem is that what's poorly known is exactly how those water masses spread from their formation regions out around the world. And so not so much that they exist, we probably have measured them enough to know what to categorize them broadly, but how they will change. So if you change the formation of Antarctic bottom water around Antarctica, how long does it take to get to different parts of the world, and how much energy does that represent being removed from the surface layers down as it goes? How does that vary if you have a cold decade or a warm decade around Antarctica? Those are the kinds of questions that we like to have a better handle on. Obviously, those would be very easy questions to answer if we just monitored the whole ocean temperature at all depths at all locations. That's unlikely to happen and probably would not be the least expensive thing to do. But failing that, to have high quality temperature and salinity measurements regularly in the bottom below 2,000 meters around the world, enough that we could start to see when the models are disagreeing, particularly the reanalysis models are disagreeing, to rein those back in and understand better where our largest deficiencies are. I guess that would be my target.
Can I chime in here and just ask Baylor, do you think Deep Argo offers that opportunity?
Yes, Argo itself is a really critical expansion in our capabilities. And the 6th assessment report as compared to the 5th assessment report is a great example of how deeply, just over the past 7 or 8 years, our understanding of ocean heat content has matured. Deep Argo would continue that to get us a sense of what's happening in the deeper ocean. And as was just mentioned a little while ago, the much longer time scale. So irreversibility is one of the things that people care a lot about. Understanding the nature of irreversibility and getting more precise about exactly how irreversible on what time scale means we need to watch the slowest parts of the system, the deepest ocean, the aspects of the cryosphere and ice sheets that change on those thousands of year time scales and longer. If this is part of measuring that observable deep time change as part of the Earth system.
Okay, I actually, I'm not seeing, you more or less answered the question by Mike Engove in the Q&A. I do have a question, and I do apologize. My power like totally went out. They're drilling outside my house, and Murphy's Law is, of course, it's only going to happen when you need to be online. So my apologies. But
Mike wrote us
want,
again. Oh, go ahead.
I want to, how are we on time? Can I ask a question, Leslie? Are we good? I think.
Yeah, I just want to follow up real quick because Mike wrote a response. He said that we mostly answered his question, but he's still interested if there are potential operational forecasts that would still show
Skill.
Yeah, so that would still show skill.
Okay, do you want to offer? I don't know if Baylor wants to expand on that.
On subsea, on fast timescales, yeah, I suppose. I don't know that there's good evidence for that for the Antarctic bottom water formation regions in quite the same way, but in the North Atlantic, the sort of warming hole that happens around the changes in the AMOC is a good example, and we do know that that has consequences on local and continental weather nearby. So variability in the AMOC is feeding its way back into those shorter term changes in the system in a way that would have a consequence. I would expect that there'd be a similar process in the Southern Hemisphere.
Looks like Bruce has an answer, and we'll do it real quick because I want to make sure to get to Lisa's question.
Ocean bottom pressure would have direct relevance for measuring any ocean circulation questions, as well as tsunami warning and so on.
So my question is, it's actually open to any of the panelists. I would like to know whether you can think of any underutilized or poorly known existing deep sea data or resource that's of relevance to modelers, management, or policymakers that actually represents some low-hanging fruit that can be made available and just hasn't been yet. Any ideas from anybody on that? Something that, you know, the end user community hasn't yet taken up, but could, should we work to make that happen? Any thoughts?
I have one. Oil companies have fiber optic cables on platforms that can collect continuous salinity, temperature, and pressure data. And that's a huge resource that just isn't shared with the scientific community for, I guess, obvious reasons, but it's something that I would think that if a push was made, we could get access to that data. And in places like the Gulf of Mexico, those sorts of data sets would go a really long way towards improving physical circulation models, because the temporal signature is both spatially and temporally dense.
Amelia? Amelia?
Sorry. Hi. Yeah, I think that we need to develop technologies to measure acoustic and optic impact, especially in benthic marine invertebrates, and yes, for environmental impact assessment, especially.
So those acoustic data, there's a lot of existing acoustic data that perhaps could be interpreted.
Yes.
You're thinking?
We need to identify the acoustic frequency and potence that can be affecting the, I don't know, corals, for example, or species like that.
So that's a form of the geophysical data is very underutilized by the biologists, right? Anybody else? I can't see all the hands who want to answer that.
Luciana.
Okay, oh, there we go. Luciana, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. That's, I think, a quite interesting and important question. I think from ISA perspective, I think would like to mention that especially in the CCZ, there's been data collected for now more than 40 years or so. And this data, although has been most of it, I think, published through various research papers, we're seeing a huge increase on those papers also in the past few years. But also the deep data database that was recently launched, it's still in its infancy. And we really hope that more data will be in a more usable, friendly manner as the database evolves and develops, and with the support of the scientific community, we can make that data that is at the moment in a more perhaps a repository type of format, but that can be better translated and analyzed by the scientific community. So we really also rely on your support in terms of your, scientists that can work together with the ISA and the ISA contractors to make that data more available. So thanks.
Thank you. Leslie, can the audience speak? Because we do have some answers put into the Q&A to that question. Can we give Dr. Venkatasan the microphone?
Yes.
You want to do that? Venkat, would you like to
Yep.
offer up your answers?
Thank you, Leslie. Wonderful session. I think you are raising a very important topic here. I like the way they said it's a repository. The deep sea is unknown. So the important point I would like to hear as a chair of International Tsunami Partnership, we have large amount of water level data. It's available with the NDBC. Maybe it may have a different role for different applications for anybody else in the oceanographic community that can be used. And we also collect deep seabed data. I think this is one of the longest data sets of temperature from the tsunameters that is also available, and that is still not touched by anybody. And that these two, and added to that, you know very well, ocean sites. We have been having microcats. I'm part of ocean sites. That also can be, but basically now presently it's used by physical oceanographer. There could be usage by the other community also. So these points, and the important thing you need to address here is a technological development. If you look at 50% of the Earth surfaces or portion is outside the EEZ, which is unknown, and most of them are deep ocean. Who will explore that? Do we think, okay, we address about close to the coast with the sovereign rights of the country, but unless there is a large program, larger funding, larger awareness, this area will remain unexplored, and it's only a sort of fashion, a sort of awareness for the school kids to talk about few photographs of the deep sea animals there in some matter. So there's more of an awareness required to the policymakers, and think about a collaboration. That's the only way we can do that. And try to find a way existing the data sets where we can have a common repository, and because this is only few limited resources we have. Thank you. And the challenge we have is deep seas also, again with the microplastics. This is what is a plastic footprint, or what we are going to leave in the deep ocean will remain forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Venkat. And I believe we're now at the point where we're supposed to switch to the next panel. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our panelists. I'm going to apologize for missing some of what you said, and but it's recorded, so I get to hear it later. Anyway, I'm going to turn it back to Leslie now to go on to the next panel.
All right, thank you. So we're going to move on to panel 2. Oh, and if you want to continue this discussion for the next 4 years, you should join the Translating Science Working Group from IDUS, because then we're going to get to keep talking about this. So up next is panel 2 about deep ocean biological modeling. And this is going to be one of the thrusts of the first working group of IDUS, which is the requirement setting working group. Our moderators of this panel is Henry Rule, who is an IDUS co-PI, as well as the lead of the DUS biology task team, and Patrick Heimbach, who is our lead PI of IDUS and one of the co-leads of DUS. So let you guys take it away.
Thanks, Leslie. And so, yeah, I'm Henry Rule. I'm at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And my background is really in biogeochemistry and ecosystems and observing and biology in these things. And but I do work with model data. I'm an avid fan of modelers and modeling. And we also have Patrick, who is a card-carrying modeler. And so we're very happy that you can join today. And thanks for joining from all these time zones around the world. And so our exam question today is, what are the challenges and opportunities in biological and ecological modeling in the deep sea, and how can we better coordinate with ocean observers in addressing gaps that are apparent. And so we heard today a little bit already about how deep ocean heat is a critical part of improving IPCC estimates of conditions in the future, and how this can impact all of us, and improve these. Looking at this kind of thing through scenarios can improve how we plan in the future. And also in relation to deep sea mining. So this is one of the areas where there could be vast areas of the seafloor impacted, and modeling will be a key part of trying to understand those impacts. And so this brings us on to biology. And so one of the main regulations, main issues about regulations in the ocean is that they do ultimately relate to biology in many ways, for protected species, biodiversity, and those kinds of things. And so, and living resources. And so we've heard also earlier today in a separate session, there was a session hosted by Challenger 150, which is a program that one of our panelists is associated with. And they covered modeling as well in the frame of biology. And today we'll be sort of, in a sense, carrying on that conversation and with a focus on deep ocean. And so, yeah, we're having hopefully a conversation across observers and modelers. We have those in our panel, and focuses on ecosystem habitat and biodiversity. And one thing to bear in mind is there are some great examples in physics and biogeochemistry that we can build on in terms of how to work and improve modeling in the deep ocean for biology. And so with that, Patrick, you want to add anything as we start off?
No, let's jump right in. So please.
Yeah, thank you, and feel free to chime in as helpful. And so our first panelist is Adrian Martin from the National Oceanography Center in the UK. Adrian.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to join the panel. And I really enjoyed the event this morning as well, which was in some sense a warm-up for this in terms of discussing modelling. So my name is Adrian Martin. I'm based in the National Oceanography Centre in the UK. I actually come from a mathematical background, so that means that I'm quite open-minded in terms of my modelling. And as a result, I've been involved in modelling everything from nutrient uptake by single cells all the way up to global simulations of biogeochemical cycles. And in particular relevance to this panel, more recently I've become involved in the development of the Boris model, that's benthic organisms resolved in size, which is a model of the benthic ecosystem being developed at the National Oceanography Centre, and it's something that Henry was involved in as well. And that is a model which takes the approach of using allometry to represent the physiological rates. And so it allows you to reproduce changes in biomass over a huge size range of organisms in a relatively efficient way, because you're making some assumptions about how physiological rates scale with size. To go on to the opportunities and challenges, I'll start with challenges. As I said, because I have a mathematical perspective, I tend to sort of look for similarities in systems, and taking a look at the deep sea, particularly the benthos, which is what I've been particularly interested in, and comparing that to developments in sort of the surface ocean over the last 20, 30 years, the obvious comparison to make is the change in our thinking that satellite data has given us in terms of how the surface ocean functions. The role of eddies, the mesoscale, the amount of spatial structure that's there, the speed with which that spatial structure can vary, has changed our thinking quite radically in terms of how we understand the surface ecosystem operating. And so to me, the big challenge is doing the same for the deep ocean. I know it's very difficult from an observational point of view, but essentially getting a better feel for, what are the spatial scales, how rapidly do, organism densities change with scales, and what are the timescales at which they evolve, because one of the issues in the upper ocean is trying to disentangle spatial effects from temporal effects. And I think that's something we're only starting to approach in the deep ocean. In terms of opportunities, to finish on a positive note, we now have a whole range of shiny yellow things that we can stick in the ocean, AUVs. We have some incredible camera systems, and we have machine learning. And so if we do want to construct something like a satellite system for the deep sea, I think the facilities are now there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. And so our next panelist is Amelia Bridges from the Plymouth University.
Hi, thank you. And thanks for inviting me to speak on the panel today. So as Henry said, my name is Amelia, and I am an early career researcher at the University of Plymouth in the UK in the Deep Sea Conservation Research Unit. So I have recently submitted my PhD, which looked at really the spatial ecology of vulnerable deep sea ecosystems in the South Atlantic, and how we can use existing and new modelling techniques, particularly to address questions around sustainable management and how to sustainably grow blue economies. So the models that I'm most familiar with would be habitat suitability models, or species distribution models, they're sometimes called, and their application. But I've also just started a position looking at larval dispersal models. So I'm kind of jumping to a different type of model and looking forward to discussing those hopefully today too. But to move on to the questions, I think it's a really exciting time for modelling in the deep sea. I think the challenges are probably, if I was going to be really succinct about it, would be lack of high resolution data, or where that data sometimes does exist, it's unavailable to the scientific community. So I think Lisa asked a question earlier about, do we know of any existing data sets that modelers could use? They're definitely out there, and a lot of the time we just don't have access to them. And secondly, there is a bias in that data. So I know we touched on this morning, but we have an enormously larger amount of data for the Northern Hemisphere compared to the Southern Hemisphere. So I think addressing that is going to be really crucial. But opportunities, I think there are some great opportunities for collaboration coming up, particularly with Challenger 150 and the other UN Ocean Decade programs. There's lots to be said for capacity building, collaboration, coordination, and I think it's really exciting to see that happening. And then similarly, actually, to what Adrian said, the technological advancements that we're having at the moment. So, using AI and increasing computer power to reduce bottlenecks in, for example, image analysis, which ultimately makes those data sets that we can train and build our models with. So yeah, I think that's my top kind of 2 challenges and 2 opportunities, but looking forward to discussing them.
Yes, thank you. And Qilin Wei from the National Taiwan University.
First, I want to thank Henry and Patrick for inviting me to this wonderful panel. So my name is Qilin Wei. I'm from National Taiwan University. So I consider myself a seagoing benthic ecologist. So I mostly focus on soft sediment community, interest in all kinds of habitat on the continental margin, especially submarine canyon. And I also do some ecological modeling, mostly looking at the statistical relationship between the environment and the fauna. So I'm both the observer and the modeler, and but not particularly good at either of them. So I will start with my panel questions with the challenges. So I think a lot of challenges has been covered by the other panelists. So first, of course, is the scarcity of the deep sea biological observation. So we often have to pool data temporally to have enough spatial coverage, or have to pool taxa because the species identification are usually not consistent among projects, or just not very reliable. But I think the more importantly is we often lack of the ecological relevant environmental variable. For example, we often don't know where are the hot button or where are the soft button substrate. And also we often lack of the spatial temporal matched predictor. So the modeler are usually limited by what we got. And so lack of good environmental predictor are usually the largest source of the model uncertainty. And also I think one big challenge is the climate model. The climate model provide very useful environmental variable, but they tend to more focus on the upper ocean or water column processes. For example, the model uncertainty usually are much higher for the seafloor projection than for the surface projection. So that means the seafloor projection themselves are not well agreed among each other. Another example is the available climate model often usually they don't provide the export POC flux as a variable at seafloor. And then this is one of the most important factors that can affect the seafloor community. And so maybe I then finish with some opportunity. So since most of the model uncertainty come from the availability and the quality of the data, so I think those can offer a systematic collection of more and better environmental and biological data simultaneously. That would be very helpful. And also one positive note is with the ongoing seabed 2030, we will have better availability of multi-beam bathymetry. And the bathymetry is probably the best and the most reliable predictor for ecological model. And like other people mentioned, that a new low-cost deep sea observation tool, there's camera, and perhaps the image annotation and AI-based method for semi-automatic and automatic image analysis. This can greatly improve the efficiency to collect deep sea biological data. Finally, I think the most importantly with the deep ocean observation strategy, we can have better coordination in deep ocean observing. So there'll be more efficient channel to convert the know-how of the deep ocean observing to scientists in countries with more relative limited resources. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Charles Stock from the NOAA GFDL lab in New Jersey. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Henry. So I'm Charlie Stock. I'm from NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory, where I work on one of the primary developers of the biogeochemical component of GFDL's Global Earth System Model. And I also work on a variety of climate impacts questions for marine resources with NOAA and academic colleagues. So I'm really happy to be here to think a little bit deeper in the water column than I often do. I'll start a little bit with what I see as the opportunities. And with these opportunities, you might classify them a little bit more as motivation rather than opportunity, but it's really the opportunity, I think, for improved Earth system predictions and projections for societally important questions that really excites me about the deep ocean effort that we're talking about here. And the things about the deep ocean that excite me in terms of the opportunities they provide is first that it has a long memory. And this was touched on in the previous panel. Once an anomalous conditions established in the deep ocean, it can persist for a long period of time and evolve in predictable ways, unlike a lot of surface processes that rapidly get mixed up with a chaotic atmosphere. And this provides opportunities for skillful prediction for societally relevant quantities and informed management decisions. The second is that the benthos is a particularly energetic area of biogeochemical transformation. And so it's critical for establishing background levels of micronutrients like iron. Anaerobic processes in the benthos shape nitrogen and phosphorus supply that shapes global productivity. And of course, calcium carbonate deposits and other things can control the carbon reservoir. So, Mandy pointed out that it was I think a reactor and a repository, and that's very much true in a big way for benthic biogeochemistry. And the third thing is that benthos is really uniquely productive. You think about it, it really concentrates energy from a really dilute 3D environment into a comparatively two-dimensional space. It sprinkles in some habitat structure, and it ultimately creates a surprisingly productive environment. Whenever people look at global fisheries yields, areas with that strong benthic component often really show up as outliers in terms of the productivity that they provide. As an overarching comment about this, what really gets me excited is 2,000 meters is great, but I love to see in the plans that there was a recognition of the need to go up to 200 meters where needed, and to really connect ultimately to the shelf scale efforts. I think that for a lot of those benthic reaction arguments and productivity arguments, there's a real impetus to cover that 200 meter to 2,000 meter space. And I wouldn't want just the 2,000 meter deep Argo boundary to prevent us from doing that. So that's as a first comment. For the challenges, I think it's useful to consider why we use, how we integrate observations and models. How do we use them together? And for that, I'd like to kind of harken back to a previous IPCC report where the question was asked, why do we trust climate model projections? And two criteria were identified. And the first is that the model fundamentals are based on established physical laws, such as conservation of mass, energy, and momentum, along with the wealth of observations. And there are, of course, ecological equivalents to those laws. They might not be as tightly constrained, but they exist. Conservation still occurs. And the second is that those models simulate important aspects of the current climate and past climate change. That's that we can verify the models against observations. And that's where I think traditionally the challenge has been in the deep ocean, and that the observations have been difficult to come by. And as I read the Deuce white paper and the implementation plan over the past week, I certainly saw a lot of cause for optimism. Concerted observations from sustained laboratories, moorings, and networks can provide, I think, a lot of that mechanistic understanding of the way benthic ecosystems work. If they're properly spaced between ecoregions, they could play a similar role to what Jagoff's played for the surface ocean and understanding carbon export, where there were a limited number of systems, but they were representative of broader biomes, and we use those heavily to tune the surface biogeochemical models we use today. However, I struggled with one really important aspect of the verification, and I swear Adrian and I did not talk before this meeting, but I essentially landed on the same place that he articulated. What we seem to be lacking is that large-scale spatial temporal picture that ocean color provides us for the surface ocean. Now, ocean color is by far not the perfect measurement. In fact, it can be extremely frustrating at times to try and derive information from ocean color. But it was revolutionary in its ability to reveal the broad-scale spatial and temporal evolution of the surface ecosystem. And it's provided important emergent constraints for those surface ecological models. So like Adrian, I think my main conclusion in looking at the challenges is how do we get that data over those large spatial and temporal scales to even verify the large scale spatial gradients and the seasonal evolution as a first constraint. So I think I'll leave with that, and also maybe have a gratuitous push not to forget to get up to that 200 meters and to connect with those shelf regions. So thank you.
Yes, and thank you very much. I expect we'll come back to some of those topics in the discussion. And so next up is Telmo Murata from the University of the Azores.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, I'm Telmo Murata from the University of the Azores. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think that the main challenge was already expressed many times by Adrian Chinley and Charles now. But it's to understand how oceanographic processes and water masses shape the diversity and the distribution of, in this case, benthic biological communities, but also to be able to have enough information to predict their distribution and the future climate conditions. So I think the challenges are well identified. I just wanted to give you a brief idea of how we here in the Azores dealt with those challenges and transformed those into opportunities. And over the last 3 years, pretty much, I have kind of embraced the challenge of visiting every single geomorphological structure that we have in the Azores, which is very vast, about 1 million square kilometers, 2.5 times terrestrial mainland California, to give you an idea of how large the area is, and visit every single geomorphological structure down to about 1,000 meters. And the idea is to increase our understanding of the deep sea in the Azores, and yeah, over the last few years, I dedicated to work mostly to increase the knowledge of the Azores, acknowledging that the climate is changing and the water mass conditions and water masses and properties are changing. But the main goal is to inform conservation and sustainable use. And we have partnered with the local government of the Azores to develop systematic conservation planning approaches to designate 15% of the EZ of the deep sea as a no-take zone. So having information is crucial, but we need spatial information. Most or some people, when thinking about observatories, people think about fixed, for example, buoys or moorings that will give you very detailed information of a bunch of parameters, but limited to a specific place. And when we want to do deep ocean biological modeling, what we need, as again, Adrian Charles and Chin Lee mentioned, is better data spatially and better predictions. So the opportunity that we saw from the challenge, because we were really crazy down to 1,000 meters by 2020 or 2021. We didn't have ROVs in the Azores. No, there's no large research vessels. And I think we really need a paradigm shift on how we see deep sea exploration. We need, of course, also to keep developing large, expensive artificial intelligence, large research vessels, large and expensive ROVs, but most people around the world cannot offer or access those platforms. So instead of waiting for those platforms to come to us, we decided to develop a new low-cost system that is called the Azores Drift Cam, which just presented at the 16th Deep Sea Biology Symposium. But this allowed us in the last, 3 years to spend 70 days at sea to perform about 380 dives, to cover over 210 kilometers of seafloor, and to collect over 300 hours of good quality bottom footages. I did a quick comparison of what the NOAA Deep Sea Discovery ROV of the NOAA Oceans Explorer does every year. And in average, they cover 600 meters of seafloor per day. So what we covered over the last 3 years, it's about equivalent to 300 days of work of the NOAA Deep Discovery ROV. If, I don't know how much it costs, but if it's about 20,000 euros a day, we are talking about 6 million euros to get the same amount of information that we collected using a platform that costs about 10,000 euros and can be deployed by local fishing vessels. So I think the opportunities are here for at least having a rapid appraisal of what lives in the seafloor, but we still need to cover what Adrian expressed very well, the part of the environmental conditions at the seafloor. And that's what now are limiting significantly our ability to develop models. We have now the biological data, we have the modeling tools, and we have somehow very coarse resolution environmental data for present day and for future climate conditions. And that's where I think the most challenge still relies. So thank you for being so specific about the work we have been doing in the Azores, but I think sometimes it's good to give precise examples and concrete examples on how to address the challenges that we are faced on deep sea exploration. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. And that example punctuates the potential as other systems, such as those imaging systems, are picking up in pace around the world. And so we've got about just under 15 minutes left. And so I just wanted to orient the discussion. So we're of course welcome to any questions, but just want to reference that we did have some earlier discussion today that did go into, what kinds of data to collect in terms of observations and some various modeling needs generally across variables. But we still have a way to go in the discussion around what needs to happen now and how to realize some of these opportunities. And so in the DEUCE context, we have some capability where we can do some scoping and roadmap work, collate requirements and that kind of thing, and collate the information on tools and how they might come together as just as an example of where we could go next. But it would be great to hear from the audience on that topic in particular, but any questions, of course, welcome. And I'm not sure that we have any, Patrick. Perhaps I'm missing anything, but there we go. A couple of.
Just to kick off the discussion, Telmo, this was very, very compelling, the low-tech technology that you described, and it reminds me of the beginning of Argo. Prior to Argo, the Thales floats were instruments that were developed for very regional programs like Labrador measurements and so on, and then the type of technology became sufficiently cheap and autonomous that it could be deployed at a global scale. Are you envisioning that the technology that you're developing would actually lend itself, if one thinks sort of from the local scale, to a system that one could think of as a network, like the Argo system could be deployed globally for the deep ocean? Because that is really the big challenge, to not just have these, as you pointed out, properly point-wise observatories, but to have something where you can begin to monitor the global deep ocean. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. To be totally frank and honest with you, that's our kind of dream. We want to democratize deep sea exploration and access to deep sea data. So that's why we made the system available into open access scientific publication with a very detailed supplementary material, like a recipe book. Everyone around the world can just print that document and build their own camera system. And we will be here to help if necessary. We have been in contact already with many research groups around the world and helping them to set drift cams like the ones we developed here. So that's really our dream, is to see with this system or any other system, deep sea exploration available to all, and count with myself and our team to help reaching that vision. And we may be in contact with Challenge 150 in order to provide them more information and more detail on how to build, produce and operate the system. Because it's really easy, it's really simple, and it's really cheap, and really, and was made with components that you can buy online or find on your local store. So yeah, this is our dream, to make deep sea research available to all.
Thank you. And I think Baylor has a question. And then...
Sure. So it's very nice to hear about the new instruments from Telmo, and also hear about the challenges from Charlie and Adrian about trying to get a synoptic image. And I think Amelia also touched a bit on some of the aspects that influences the modeling. So in the deep sea, we expect the scales and the time scales and the velocities and the energy content all to be quite different from the surface ocean. from a physical perspective, but what about from a biological perspective? Do we think that the communities are smaller or larger or faster or slower? And how do we think about that as we think about spread and the biogeochemical aspects?
Adrian, perhaps you want to, I know you've looked at this.
Yeah, I mean, I can't give you any answer, Baylor. But all I can really do is sort of add to the question. And I think particularly for, what we might regard as more pressing questions in terms of response of benthic ecosystems to perturbation, if there's going to start to be, large scale mining, a critical aspect there is how quickly do the organisms move, because how quickly can they recolonize the areas? And so, that to me is a complicated question, because it's partly down to, the transport by the flow. So that's a physics question. And, you're right that the circulation characteristics are different in the deep sea to the surface. But then on top of that, you have the characteristics of the organisms, in terms of how mobile they are, how quickly they can move, how they use their habitat in terms of, whether they're likely to range further or shorter. And so to me, that is one of the most difficult things facing us in terms of looking at the recovery from deep sea mining, in terms of being able to look at those two aspects, which to me are fundamental to working out how quickly an ecosystem responds.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll perhaps just add one additional element to that, is that one of the challenges is that the data for those different size classes and things often comes in different forms that are difficult to integrate into modeling for use in modeling. And so that's another sort of one of the real challenges, is to deal with that. And so Amelia, maybe did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I did, thanks. It's for Telma, actually. I'm really glad that you presented that, because this session clashed with the DSBS presentation on this camera. So I was wondering, kind of like in the context of most of us said that models are limited typically by environmental data or lack thereof, is there a functionality whereby you can add some type of environmental sensor to the drift cam, or is that the case already, or is it something you are considering developing?
Well, it depends on the cost of the sensors. The camera system was developed following very strict principles and guidelines. One is related to the cost. So if you want to use or to add a sensor that costs a couple €100 or €1,000, we can fit it in there. If it costs 5, 6, 7,000 euros, then it's too expensive to add to the system. This is because the system was designed to be used in areas where sometimes ROVs and submersibles don't go because it's too dangerous for them. Like, for example, in the Azores, areas with lots of lost fishing lines where ROVs can get easily entangled, or submersibles. So sometimes we can lose our gear, and in fact we lost 2 already. One entangled on 2 fishing lines close to a vertical wall that the cable was broken, and the other one was just 2 days ago on a very similar situation. But because the camera costs about, the system costs about 10 to 15 euros, 15,000 euros. Although it's expensive, we always have 3 on our vessel, and when we lose one, we keep working. It's litter that we leave on the seafloor, but it's for increase the scientific knowledge. So the answer is yes, you can use as much sensors as you want, but usually it needs to be very cost-effective sensors. As for today, we only have temperature and depth sensors because are the cheaper ones. We don't even have acoustic pingers to, like USBL systems, to increase the positioning or of the system, not because they are not available, but because they are expensive and make all the operation much more complex and are to implement in other parts of the world.
Thank you. And so we've got just a few minutes left, and I have a question, seeing no others at the moment. So some of the things we've heard about are that the shape of the seafloor is a critical part of modeling for the benthos at least. And this benthic interface is an important part of the biology of the ocean. And the biogeochemical models that exist now, I think all of them that I'm aware of at least are mainly the ones that are, used in the case of IPCC and are fully dynamic in their scenarios and so on. All these models are really designed for the upper ocean, so that the way that the model structure, it's kind of a technical point, but the model structures has a higher resolution at the surface relative to the seafloor. The bins in the model vertically are very thick at the seafloor often. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity for a little bit of redesign and thinking about modeling that is more inclusive of the seafloor, and if it's a worthwhile exercise to consider adding layers or reorienting layers at the seabed to try and get a bit closer to this.
I can hop in on that one if that's okay.
Sure.
And actually, Baylor might want to chime in too a little bit later, but I actually think that with the global climate models, because of the importance of the interior ocean to the heat uptake and carbon uptake, there's actually been quite a bit of attention paid to the maintenance of interior water mass structures, right? And so one of the newest GFDL model, for instance, adopts an isopycnal approach in the interior to be able to maintain those water masses that were artificially diffused previously. So I think there's an opportunity to start from a very good subsurface water mass structure, but we need to build up the bottom boundary layer dynamics in the same way that we have built up the atmospheric ocean boundary layer dynamics. A lot of the principles could be quite similar. I think that yes, the opportunity is there, and these flexible coordinate systems should allow us to do it efficiently. But I would say that when I think about the simplifications that make me most concerned about our representation of benthic processes, the environmental information across the global scale isn't what keeps me up at night. It's the simplicity of our benthic ecology and biogeochemistry. A lot of things we're just reflecting off the bottom to conserve mass. The organic material falls down, it gets remineralized, a little bit gets taken out by anaerobic processes. So I think we have to attack it on both fronts. And I was really excited to see information like the platforms that were just talked about that might be able to get us the what's the biomass? What's bioturbating that water? How do we parameterize it within the context of a more mechanistic biogeochemical and ecological formulation?
And yeah, thank you for that. And I see in the chat that Baylor has indeed been thinking about this and has a reference that he's put into the chat. And Patrick, I'm going to finish this off here. We're at
Charles, that sounds very compelling, and maybe to jump onto this and also getting Baylor's perspective. The CLIVAR has a panel on ocean model development that is very much geared to the physical component, and maybe, I don't know, it's beginning to some extent the biochemical component. My impression from being really outside of this is that the ecosystem and biology is maybe much more a grassroots community working on very different aspects. And from a thinking about collaboration, how can one improve those? Would it be sensible to think about a specific model development panel or group that targets some of the issues, especially the one that you mentioned at the very last moment, the simplicity of some of the processes that are represented in some of these models, to have a sort of a group that discusses this, a bit like the CLIVAR group for the physics.
All right. So that's our time, I think. Over to you, Leslie.
Yep. And Patrick, in case that was a question, I think we say yes. And then
yes. I was going to say the same, Patrick. Yes.
Why not?
All right. So thank you, everyone. And we talked a lot in this modeling session about technology. So now we're going to move over to the technology panel. So panel 3, technology development in the deep ocean. And this aligns with the IDUCE working group number 2 on implementing observing. Our moderators of this panel is Adam Soul. He is the head of the Solid Earth Working Group for DEUCE, as well as a co-PI on IDEUCE, and Felix Jansen, who is the lead on the biogeochemistry task team for DEUCE. And he is, because you can't be a PI on an NSF grant from another country, he's an honorary co-PI of IDEUCE. So I'll let you guys take it away.
Thanks a lot, Leslie. And I would just echo your comment that the technological aspects of deep ocean observing has been a thread that's gone through all the panels so far, and you know, is one of the exciting things about the DEUCE and IDEUCE programs is the interconnections between these kind of ocean science domains that we're developing. But I'm really excited to have this tremendous group on this panel, and the question that we've asked them to address in comments after they give a short introduction from themselves are, what are the gaps in technological development in the deep ocean? So a fairly broad question, but I think we'll get a lot of different perspectives on answers to that. Before we start, I will introduce myself, Adam Soul, from the University of Rhode Island Graduate School of Oceanography. I'm also the director of NOAA's Ocean Exploration Cooperative Institute, and I will hand it over to my co-moderator, Felix, to introduce himself as well.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Felix Jansen. I'm a benthic biogeochemist by training, and my focus was always on transport and respiration at the deep sea floor. And by that, I'm of course excited about observing technologies, because you need them for those for that kind of work. I work at the Alfred Wegener Institute, and my group runs the long-term observatory House Garden as part of the FRAM infrastructure. You may have heard about it, and so yeah, I'm excited about helping Adam to run this panel, and I will keep a close eye on the question and answers. And I would really like to invite the participants of this event to go back to the question and answers and type their answers, their questions in, so we get a lively discussion.
Thanks, Felix. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Brennan Phillips to introduce himself and share his thoughts on gaps in technological development.
Sure, thanks, Adam. Yep, so I'm Brennan Phillips. I'm at the University of Rhode Island, along with Adam. And in this slide I popped up, I work on a large range of topics in the lab. I'm an ocean engineer, oceanographer, deep sea roboticist, sort of mix all that together with a lot of different projects. But relevant to the discussion today, I thought it'd be important to highlight that I'm working on deep sea distributed sensing, particularly fiber optic temperature sensing. And then I have another portfolio of low-cost deep sea sensors and cameras and computers and that sort of thing. So we've come up with a system called DPI, which is a low-cost deep sea camera, run off Raspberry Pi type stuff, which can do a lot of things. Recently, we have a fiber optic reel that's very compact, runs on a 12-volt system, can go on any boat, that gives you live telemetry from the deep ocean. And then we can do more things with DPI. We can run them in big arrays and stereo imaging and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we're going right now with that. Yeah, I'll keep it short because I think in the discussion I have some other things I'd like to highlight, Adam. So you can move on.
Okay, that's great. All right, we'll hand it over to Jérôme Blandin from IFREMER.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. I am Jérôme Blandin. I'm working for IFREMER, the French Research Institute for the Exploitation of the Sea. I've been leading fixed point observation observatory projects for 2 decades now, with a focus on the research of light and relocatable solutions as much as possible. Now, to jump into the present topic, maybe we should step back to the need. I think several needs were brightly expressed in the previous panels. Just to sort them out roughly in terms of what should be extended, what should be decreased, what should be increased. We could roughly say that for deep sea observation, we need to extend the spatial coverage, okay? We need to extend the range of observed parameters, and also we need to extend the interoperability between observing infrastructures in order to avoid duplicating costs of, regarding maintenance and things like that. We also need to decrease the annual operation costs, and this is a challenge for a technological challenge. And we also need to, of course, decrease the environmental footprint. What do we need to increase for us? We think that what should be increased is the in situ decision-making capability. And also we need more communication capabilities between the ocean floor or water column and the shore. Could you pass the next slide, please? So to address all these needs, what are the general technologies, the key technologies we need to monitor or to develop ourselves? Very briefly, and again, because to extend the spatial coverage of fixed point observatories, of course, they need to be able to cooperate with mobile platforms. And the main technical challenge is how to operate mobile platforms without human intervention for several months or 1 year or several years even. We need also to increase the underwater wireless communication technologies and also underwater wireless power transfer technologies. One thing which is not evolving, unfortunately, but for which the need is highly acknowledged for decades, is the communication between surface buoys, roughly, and the seabed. And but although the need is widely acknowledged, it's a big challenge that needs, I think, high investments to overcome. Of course, there's the eternal problem of subsea energy generation and its storage. Okay, a large chapter. And regarding the embedded decision-making capability increase, one thing to look over is how to progress in low power embedded computing capability with high processing capability, and of course the materials. So it's a broad view, and I think maybe in the discussions we'll go more into the details. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Jerome. That's excellent. All right, let's move on to Alana Sherman. She doesn't seem to be here. All right, that's fine. We can move over to Bruce Howe.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good, thank you. Here on the right are a few examples of my background covering mostly long-range acoustics, mobile and fixed platforms, and now emphasizing cable systems. What I'd like to emphasize here and address is really the essential and critical infrastructure that will enable sustained deep ocean observing from microseconds to centuries, ideally. And I think a lot of the discussion so far, it comes clear that power, everything depends on power. And without power, we can't do anything in the ocean and especially in the deep sea, where it's extremely difficult to obtain power. So how do we provide that ubiquitously through the entire ocean, and specifically on the deep ocean floor, far from the surface? And with power, we can communicate, and with power, we can provide navigation capability. And necessarily, solutions must be sustained, a long-term plan at global scale and reasonable cost. Next slide. So the provision of power is very difficult on the deep sea floor. basically there's not enough kinetic energy to generate power with a turbine, for instance, in any reliable way. And the use of batteries is at the moment really the only other alternative, and they imply expensive ship time and repeat visits and so on. Cables are possible, and I'm suggesting a good candidate for supplying power. Again, power facilitates communications, not just a direct link, but also acoustic comms to mobile platforms, and acoustic navigation. A few judiciously placed acoustic sources can provide large-scale underwater GPS, enabling long-range AUVs. The figure on the left shows this with a source off Kauai and off the Northwest US. This is kind of a strange projection, the Spillhouse projection. And then while also enabling base and the same acoustics can enable basin scale acoustic tomography for temperature and heat content that Baylor mentioned. And that's on the scale of providing new estimates every single day and large scale and spatially averaging. Submarine cable technology for telecom is changing for the better. And crucially, it is becoming accepted that the infrastructure can be shared with ocean observing and early warning disaster risk reduction. And so on the bottom left and the bottom right, soon there'll be smart repeaters with sensors to be deployed first off Europe. Portuguese system is planned to be deployed already in 2024 with smart repeaters every 70 kilometers, 50 or so over 3,700 kilometers. And the goal here is to keep it simple sensors, pressure, temperature, acceleration, to enable global scale coverage as shown in the map. And then soon there will also be these branch systems lower left for nodes and observatories with significant capability in power and communications. So there one could envision much more sophisticated instrumentation and things like docking stations. These will enable a plethora of infrastructure possibilities, AUVs with sensors, and docking, underwater acoustic GPS and communications for all mobile platforms, subsurface moorings, and bottom instrumentation to support the desired sensing, acoustics, video lights, biogeochemistry, bioecosystems. So in the discussion, we need to keep in mind that without surface access to power and communication, sustained observing in the deep ocean is extremely hard. Given just the recent comments, I just want to emphasize good infrastructure can catalyze a huge amount of other things. Think of the GPS system, what it does now for us on land and space. We need the same underwater. Think of electric cars, they need GPS, they need power, they need communication. And then also GPS provided atmospheric tomography, as well as ionospheric tomography by default. And then the cable systems definitely can address all time scales from episodic to century even, climate, ocean circulation, earthquake and tsunami sensing, and so on. So, and one last point on the Baylor mentioned and others, the need to measure water masses. NSF is proposing or investigating a cable between New Zealand and McMurdo Bay, Ross Sea, and that could be a smart cable and directly measure the creation and flow of Antarctic bottom water as an example. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, you make a really compelling case for a system that provides both sensing and infrastructure. So let's move on to Alana. Welcome, Alana. Give us a brief introduction and your thoughts on the question about gaps in deep ocean observing technology.
Yes, I will. Thank you. I apologize, I'm late. So my name is Alana Sherman. I work at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. I've spent many years developing systems to study a deep ocean time series site. So we developed seafloor rovers and time-lapse camera systems and systems that look at sedimentation that go out for a year at a time without servicing. So it's definitely an area of interest for me. So to me, one of the biggest gaps is robustness. How do you keep something out to do the type of observations we want? I find that to be one of the greatest challenges, is to be able to endure and persist. And I think one way we've worked, I don't know, maybe I started off around it, is through simplicity. But what I'd like to see is robustness that is not just based on simplicity, but actually based on intelligence. And that's I think, a big challenge in any deep sea robotics. That's one area that I see as a big gap. Also communications, as other people I'm sure have mentioned, is an area that's always a challenge. I think, another thing that I see as the pieces are starting to come together now, and I see as a fruitful area for the future, is, the more observing systems that we have, the more we can kind of do smart sampling, doing, event response and things of that nature. I feel like we're on the cusp of being able to do a lot of that type of work, but that also requires, sensor, all the other things that people probably have mentioned, of low power sensors and then low power brains to be able to interpret what you're getting and then actually respond to that. So those are a few of the areas. I don't know, I know we're supposed to talk about gaps, but I see, maybe this is a gap that, I look at what people have done, for chemical sensing with like the Argo program and I see this. There's also this gap of how do we do that for biological sensing, and how do we get that type of coverage? And that's an area that I'm interested in trying to figure out as a much more challenging, or I shouldn't say much more, a challenging problem. So that, I guess, would fall under the gap of spatial coverage. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Alana. Our last panelist is Laura Cimoli. Should I go with that? Is that correct?
It's Cimoli, but that was already great, actually.
My apologies. But before you start, I want to mention that Laura, as well as Brennan, are kind of IDUCE affiliated early career researchers, and it's an exciting part of this project to bring these folks into the discussion as well. So go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And actually, yeah, thanks to the organizers. And I think this is a great opportunity for early career researchers. So I'm a postdoc at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I'm really like a large scale physical oceanographer. So my research focus on like the deeper branches of the global meridian overturner circulation. So connected with what has been said before, really deep for me means like below 2 kilometers. And one of the questions that has been raised before in terms of, why the general public should care, well, we should also remember that more than 80% of the sea bottom is actually below 2 kilometers. And again, it has been mentioned that it plays a huge role in regulating the climate system on a long time scale. But some changes, even for like the dense waters that are formed in like high latitude regions, have been happening already in the past decades. Like for example, looking at like the freshening and warming of Antarctic abyssal waters. So in that sense, it's often something that is happening now, but what are the consequences going to be for the rest of the circulation? It's where actually the tricky part come in, because mainly of lack of observations and challenges in reproducing these water masses as models. So when it comes to the observations, for example, that I'm using, I'm really mainly a tracer person and a cross-density mixing person. So I'm actually going to talk a bit more about these two, because that's actually where more of my expertise is. So for tracers, like that's like a broad, like if you want to name, but definitely there has been like a lot of advancements in the last years, and it is actually exciting to see that there are projects now that connect actually what Wajram was saying in terms of like expanding our arrays, for example, like also to a global scale. So for example, we have a global ocean like a biogeochemical Argo, which is basically the NSF contribution to the to the international like project of the biogeochemical Argo. And that's like kind of spinning off now. So it's going to be in terms of one of the gaps, you know, of like putting like a biogeochemical measurements available at a global scale. That's kind of kicking off now. And we should have like 500 biogeochemical floats like in the next like 4 years. So one challenge longer term definitely will be to kind of keep like increasing that number. The ideal number is like close to 1200, which will be like one float every like 5-degree resolution. So it's an array which will need to be expanded and like maintained over time. And then there have been other challenges, like for example, like, you know, being able to use these flows, for example, also in high latitude regions that have been sort of addressed in the past few years. And again, so in terms of like the Polar Argo projects, so increased storage space means that even if it kind of gets stuck on the ice, they can stay for like at least 11 months. They don't hit the ice actually. So those are like things that I think gaps that have been actually great, that has been great to overcome. Some of the gaps that remain, again, in terms of especially, so what I'm doing when it comes to tracers is like, for example, pushing the limits really of detection limit and like a sensor like precision, especially when you go to the deep ocean, because like the variability is different. It's like lower usually variability compared like to the upper ocean or closer to thermocline or nutricline waters, for example. This does not apply, of course, to all the sensors we have, but for example, again, when it comes to some nutrients like nitrate and so on, that's like where, or pH, so that's like where like we still like kind of again pushing the limits of our like technology advancements there. And another like topic, again, it goes switching actually to like the cross density mixing part. Why we care is because that like, especially again for deep ocean water masses, like which are closely interacting with the bottom ocean where most of actually the density mixing happens. That's important if you want to have a global picture, like close the picture of a water mass transformation from how it is transformed at the surface to how these dense waters then come back to the surface from the deep ocean. And that's a kind of a nightmare to measure because it's highly variable in space and in time, and it happens in like a turbulence, like a spatial scale, so like even centimeters, if not smaller times the spatial scale. So in that, so like talking about this topic is like, so there are tools basically to kind of measure turbulence. But those again are, it's something that has been measured like only locally. So I guess the big challenge, and I'm honestly like still kind of not unsure in terms of how that could be achieved because the challenge of the actual measurements, but it's like that we can expand that again to a global scale would be like incredibly useful to also to help, of course, like model validations and especially also to improve our model abilities to not just to reproduce the circulation, but to reproduce tracer budgets and so to have a better climate prediction. But it's again, it's so how to expanding that to a global scale, it's going to be a challenge, but it will be, I think, something incredibly useful rather than rely on like, you know, parameterize basically the pixel mixing estimates, which are great, but still are just parameterizations and with all the caveats that usually brings. And I'll stop there, I think, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. That was fantastic. Just a reminder again for the folks here at the event to input your questions into the chat window or the Q&A window for this amazing group of panelists. While you're doing that, I did have a question that kind of touches on what Laura was just saying and some of the other comments earlier, that the ocean technology enterprise in some ways is pretty fragmented, you know, with individual organizations or institutions or even labs developing technology somewhat independently. And there's real value in that in terms of innovation, but for the scale of the challenge in front of us, we're going to have to work together. So for the panelists, I wanted to ask, what do you see as the path towards coordinated ocean observation that extends across, national borders and public-private boundaries and the like?
I could jump in. It seems to me, come up a little bit earlier with Telmo Morato and his wonderful approach of just open sourcing all of their designs. So from a technology perspective, I think we need to broaden our designs in our ability to share them as much as possible. So open source publications and maybe even like a dedicated website, maybe it's hosted by Deuce or something like that, that just is like, here's everything that is open source, something that you could do yourself, so that we can, if it's open source, people will then adopt it, right? On an international scale.
Yeah, it's a great point, Brennan. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Bruce, in particular, a smart cable has to be a multinational thing. Do you see impediments to that, or is everyone on board?
Well, there are impediments, but we're getting people on board, and I mean, the Portuguese system is a prime example. So I'm hopeful, but I guess one thing I would emphasize is, well, it does seem in my experience that the oceanographic observing endeavor has been a cottage industry, basically, as you say, fragmented and everyone doing their own little thing and so on. And so really it needs a much more, for the global ocean observing system, it needs a much more focused effort, system engineering and things like this, and optimization. And a key aspect of that, I think, is getting the ocean, and maybe Patrick can say some words, the evaluation process going for new observing elements. So these observing system simulation experiments should become much more routine, so that as we come up with new ideas for, technically observing the ocean, at a concept level, even they should come up with a modeling framework to quickly evaluate the possibilities of some new system for observing the ocean, and then provide feedback to help the development of that concept. So anyway, that's my 2 bits.
Yeah. Laura.
Yeah, so I mean, I've joined the investment survey observationist group like in the last few years, and I mainly actually used when sense data that was available from international programs like the like GoShip or Argo. So I think it was like, I know that they have had their challenges, and it's still hard to coordinate like a big international groups. But that when it comes to the global scale, I think they definitely have been like outstanding like programs in that sense, in terms of like putting an international effort to have an array of, now it like maintained even array of like close to 4,000 like Argo floats. So I mean, but there are like in that sense I think good examples, and it's nice to see all the spin-offs like the Deep Argo, like the BGC Argo that came out of that. It's also true that a lot of times like these like there are other like floats that are used in other projects that of course then are not available as like the Argo data. So in that sense, like it would be nice in general as a community to have like of course access to the whole like range of data. Some big, very often for us more in regional like areas, but important like for like people living there and people studying those areas. So connecting with, I guess, with what Brennan was saying, is like if it was more like an open source like thing, it would definitely like move things forward much faster in terms of also like developing of either new tools and just like for answering like scientific questions. But yeah, so yeah, but again, I was like, I just was thinking like big international process. I think I've been at least so from what I've seen more as actually an external observer, or great people inside it might disagree with that. But
it's good that you're injecting some optimism. I appreciate that. Alana.
Yes, I was just gonna take off where Laura said, what I take from like the Argo program is like what made that successful. And I think one of the big things was it was instrumentation that was in a realm of the affordability. It was a level of complexity that was pretty, you know, approachable, and it was very easy to deploy. And it's because there's a lot of things that I could make open source, but I don't really think I could get it out there because it doesn't have those things. So I take those pieces as like, you know, for, you know, when you want to do such a big program, I think there are key components of it that have to be accessible to many. Otherwise, you know, so anyway, that's even beyond open source. I think it has to be at the appropriate level in both complexity, cost, and ease of deployment. I think that's what I learned from that program is what some of the keys of success for that type of collaboration.
That's a great point, Alana. Felix, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I wanted to just because, well, probably because I'm inclined towards benthic biogeochemistry, but also because it fits to what we just discussed and what Alana just said. So it is very complicated to do this work that you do at MBARI, looking really at the biogeochemical processes and biological communities at the seafloor. So really get the observations to the seafloor, to observations of the seafloor, not close to the seafloor with deep Argo, but at the seafloor. And in earlier sessions, we heard that this is an important aspect. So, and if we talk now about technologies, are they affordable? Are they simple enough to be picked up by many? So do you see any chance that with these kind of observations of the deep seafloor, we ever get beyond the level of process studies or very localized time series observations performed at very specialist institutions? Can that be a technology that goes into a next phase where it really has the potential to go into a global array?
Well, I'm a very optimistic person, so I think that it can, but I also recognize, having done what I have worked on, that it would be done a little bit differently because it wasn't really designed with that in mind. And we have tried to, like, say, our seafloor rover, we have tried to, you know, share that technology with anyone who's willing to build it, but it's not an easy thing to build or service. So, but I think there are ways to make things simpler. And then I think, okay, that's part one. Could you make the technology simpler and reliable? I think you can. The cost is still probably, you know, an issue, but then you got to get down there and deploy it. And so that's a costly thing. But like I said, I'm an optimistic person. So I'd like to believe that those things are possible. Maybe not at the scale of the, certainly at the Argo float, but I think we could do more than we're doing now, for sure.
Thanks, Alana. I want to get to both Jerome and Lisa. I think, Jerome, you had your hand up first, so but just make sure you keep it short so we can get all our questions in.
Yeah, thank you. A bit short. Just about the issue of working together and overcoming the fragmentation. There are already several international initiatives in this regard. I'm thinking of Ocean Best Practice that you probably all know. Encouraging sharing best practices, and it's just a step toward working together. In Europe, we have this IMSO-ERIC network specialized in a fixed point observation, and we are really doing a standardization effort. Just a simple example is the EGIM, which is the IMSO generic instrumentation module, which provides a way to measure the essential ocean variables the same way. So it's a big step towards the standardization. Just to mention these two examples.
Yeah, that's great. And even having this discussion is probably opening some people's eyes to what's out there. So thank you for that. Lisa.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the panelists whether they felt there is enough or the possibility for more engagement with instrument manufacturers and business and industry to both advance the instrument development generally and to find ways to reduce the costs and make these things more accessible. And I guess part of that question is whether the Decade for Ocean Sciences might offer those opportunities. I really don't know the answer to this question, so just wanted your thoughts.
Yeah, I'd like to jump and respond to that a little bit. I mean, as a technologist, an ocean technologist, I work with a wide range of companies, and you see a wide range of business models. And on the far end, on the worst end of things, so to speak, not to go too harsh against some of these companies, but a lot of companies just basically are trying to stovepipe the technology so much that even like a USB connector is custom made, and they're going to charge a special price just for their own type of thing, right? And they're going to kind of build their own little fiefdom out of that and make as much money as possible. And then you may have another company that may try to open source as much as possible. And then like I would look to Blue Robotics as a model of that, where you can go online and you can buy a lot of their components, or you can spend a little bit more and get like a fully built system from them. And I think that that's kind of where us in this conversation would like other companies to go, so that prices are lower and you have more flexibility to build systems from that. So Lisa, I don't know, I would have to look to you to maybe find some leadership to maybe come up with some ideas to motivate companies to go towards that other angle, which is trying to go to as broad of an audience as possible. At the end of the day, you may profit more that way, but there needs to be maybe some encouragement from the community to do that. Another thing that I guess I personally am trying to do, but I'm not there yet, is there is a way to profit from sharing designs as opposed to hardware. So a business model could be that you sell hardware to those that want to buy it, the housing of an instrument, but you can also maybe sell the design of that so that somebody can make it themselves. You still make money off of that. Companies do need the profit. We need to recognize that. But there are some ways that it can be carved up so that it is to a broader audience, and therefore more orders come in and that sort of thing. So I think there's a shift, a little bit of a paradigm shift to get away from that stovepiping, which we see some of the larger ocean tech companies doing. How's that?
That's good. Let me ask, in addition to that, have we properly incentivized the sharing of technology? I mean, right now, you know, in the academic world, your paper being cited 500 times is a great thing, but your system being built 500 times doesn't really amount to anything. So do we need to revise the incentive structure to promote that kind of activity?
Potentially, I don't know how to do it though. Yeah.
All
Adam,
right.
how much time do we have? Because there
We
was
have
one
about
thing.
40 seconds. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I hate to take it over, but Mandy, I really wanted to bring up something that you were bringing up in the earlier panel, which is about using fiber optic temperature data from industry ROVs that are being done. And we can have an offline conversation, but for the community to know, that's not, unfortunately, it's not as straightforward as it may sound. It sounds like a dream and it could happen, but your problem is that you're running power through the cable too at the same time, and that heats the cable. So it's going to throw off all the sensing that you have with it. On an observatory scale, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart to talk to other people in this room maybe at some point about, is it's a very elegant thing to be able to just spread fiber optics around the seafloor and do a lot of different sensing with it. You know, it centralizes the technology into one place, but the fiber itself or the cables themselves, they're pretty robust, to speak to Alana there, right? You know, the cable itself is going to just kind of be out there. But we need to get very consistent about what kind of fiber optics are in there. This is a detailed thing, but it's important for people to recognize that it's when it comes to sensing with fiber, there are special fibers that are good at that, and there are many fibers that are not good at that. And the fibers that are spread out on the seafloor right now, and those that are still being planned, they're not the right kind, or they're probably not the right kind. So we need to focus as a community on good ones. That's it.
Okay, Brendan, I'm going to cut you off because I don't want to be responsible for going over time. Leslie is a very rough taskmaster. So you're in the next panel, so you can keep talking about it.
It's a great segue. Thank you. All right. Last panel. Come on. Oh, it's thinking. There we go. All right, what a fitting way to end this amazing discussion with a look to our future. So I would like to introduce everyone to the future leaders of deep ocean observing. These are our wonderful early career members. You've seen them across different panels, and then we've invited 2 more to join us. Pradeep Singh from University of Bremen, and he's from Malaysia, and Laura Elsler from the World Maritime University in Sweden. And I'll have them speak more about themselves in a second. So with this panel, we wanted to take everything that we've discussed so far and wrap it up in terms of now that we've talked about technology and talked about modeling and talked about societal needs and scientific gaps, what are we going to do about it? Where do we want to see deep ocean observing in 10 years? And so one of the goals of the decade is this cultivating of leaders so that in 2030, when we're all 10 years older, we now have the leadership who's been brought up throughout the decade to be positioned to really take us into the future. So the 3 main questions that this decade is going to tackle is, where do you wish to see ocean observing? How can we better coordinate observing efforts in the deep ocean to leverage shared assets? And how can we best align our research trajectories today to address the societal needs of tomorrow? So starting us off, we'll do a round robin like the other panels, and we'll try to keep them concise. Pradeep, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you think about where we're going?
Great. Thank you very much. And greetings to everyone. Thanks for the invitation, Leslie and Lisa. So my name is Pradeep Singh. I'm trained as a lawyer back in my home country, Malaysia, although a non-practicing one for nearly a decade now. So I'm currently with the University of Bremen, and my expertise are mainly on public international law, the law of the sea, international environmental law, climate policy, and ocean governance. And I work mainly on issues in areas beyond national jurisdiction, on topics such as deep seabed mining and the conservation of marine biodiversity. In terms of where do we wish to see, or where do I wish to see deep ocean observing in 10 years? Well, I think what I would really like to see is a strengthening of this science policy interface. So, to allow us to make more informed decision-making or science-based decision-making. And I think in this respect, it's also important to sort of merge with other forms of knowledge, including traditional knowledge. I think deep sea observation is very essential if we're truly going to give effect to sort of governance principles like the precautionary approach. I think it also allows us to sort of implement adaptive management, which can then sort of inform decisions that we need to make, including whether to suspend activities that are going on or to introduce modification. And in this respect, I think we really need robust observation and monitoring strategies, especially since, as now we start to look towards exploring more nascent activities such as deep seabed mining, which was covered across the panels before this. And I think if done correctly, deep sea monitoring observation, would help us sort of determine the carrying capacity, for instance, of a particular ocean region, and this would then help us to sort of decide what activities should take place where and at what intensity. And ideally, I think as sort of been sort of repeated across the panels, everything should be as far possible accessible, open for verification, and if also possible, in real time. So finally, in terms of practical terms, what I would really wish to see in terms of in the next 10 years and towards the end of this decade, I would actually really like to see the member states, for instance, of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, as well as ongoing negotiations that are going on at the United Nations, for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in beyond national jurisdiction. I would really like to see member states sort of upholding their commitments and obligations that they've sort of made over the years. And just to give you a few examples, I mean, if we look at the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was adopted in 1982, even though it was adopted that long ago, there are some very inspirational provisions there. And just to read some of it, one provision actually says that states shall cooperate either directly or through international organizations for the purposes of promoting studies, undertaking programs of scientific research, and encouraging the exchange of information and data. States shall endeavor to participate actively in regional and global programs to acquire knowledge for the assessment of the nature and extent of pollution, exposure to it, and pathways, risks, and remedies. And another provision reads, states shall endeavor directly or through international organizations to observe, measure, evaluate, and analyze by recognized scientific methods the risk or effects of pollution of the marine environment. In particular, states shall keep under surveillance the effects of any activities which they permit or in which they engage in order to determine whether these activities are likely to pollute the marine environment. So these provisions are there. It has been there for 4 decades now, but to a large extent, these provisions have not been actually given strong effect to. And so hopefully by the end of this decade and through the UN decade, it sort of facilitates states coming together and really giving effect to what they have actually committed to. And I see this as an opportunity through deep ocean observing strategies.
Thank you. That was great. Real quick before we go to the next panelist, I forgot to introduce my other moderator. I was so excited. Justin Stopa is helping to moderate this session, and he is another early career researcher on the IDES project. So Justin, you can wave. He'll be monitoring the Q&A, so feel free to send stuff in. All right, Laura, let's hear from you.
Yeah, hi, Leslie. Thank you for organizing the panel and everybody who's been involved in the organization. My name is Laura Elster, and I'm from World Maritime University, and I'm working on the ocean twilight zone. So this is deep, but not so deep as compared to many of the aspects, such as deep sea mining, of course, which is all the way down to the subsea. And what the ocean twilight zone, it's a potentially rich in biodiversity. It holds a really great abundance of animals, and I'm working on the governance mostly and looking at how those animals, through their movements up and down the water column, transport carbon, and how this carbon sequestration that happens through this process or through this movement can be governed through different international agreements. And another aspect that I'm working on is, which is less related to my research, but a lot to the practical aspects of my work, is an interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was really happy to hear that a lot of the panels were already touching on a couple of those aspects. And to me, ocean observing is really, in a way, an extension of the human senses. So people are a great asset are the greatest asset for ocean observations, and making those ocean observations also useful for sustainable development. So one of the key things that I would hope for within the next 10 years is an understanding of this value of diversity, of the diversity of people that can be brought into ocean observations, and a broader inclusion of these communities and stakeholders. And we've touched upon many, but a lot of the current practice is still really limited in this senses, so that confers both to academia, but it also confers to a lot of industry that is consolidated amongst a handful of corporations. And of course, yeah, and so I think to unlock the potential of what the deep oceans can bring to, and also can continue to keep as a service to humanity, we will have a better chance at managing this if we have a broader base of people and their minds put together for thinking and developing systems for ocean observation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see, Amelia Bravo, would you like to go next? I feel like you're a good segue of talking about the importance of people and inclusivity.
Hello, thank you. Okay, but just in case I introduce myself again, I am a marine ecologist. I work at CONICET. Universidad de Buenos Aires, Argentina. I am a co-leader of the Offshore Energy Working Group of DOSI. Thank you, Lisa and Leslie, for letting me participate in this panel. I wish in 10 years we have a global scientific network that could collaborate as external auditor of environmental impact assessment presented by the offshore industries. I think that this could help a lot developing countries to require the accomplishment of high environmental standards to the offshore industries, which currently have more flexible environmental restrictions in developing countries. I also wish that scientists have a stronger participation in NGOs and educational activities, as well as in the industrial sector. And separately of this, I wish in 10 years we have a global network of citizen scientists constituted by the people that work in offshore industries. And finally, I think that the need of guarantee equal access to the deep sea resources for the current and future generations is linked with the need of equal access to all the scientists to the deep sea. And for this, I think that we need an equity quota in the academia, in the scientific editorials, and in the international decision making in order to guarantee the equal right of participation of scientists without the distinction of its origin, ethnicity, religion, gender, or sexuality. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Chilin, would you like to go next?
Okay, thanks for the opportunity. So again, I'm gonna introduce myself again. So my name is Chilin Wei. I'm from National Taiwan University. So I'm a benthic ecologist. So mostly working on benthos on the continental margin and different habitats. So I'm both in situ. I do field work and also a bit of modeling. So I think I can keep it short. So what I wish to see ocean observing in 10 years. So when I think of these questions, I thought about some of my personal experience. So I remember when I started to look for position, my postdoc supervisor told me, don't tell people that I want to work in the deep ocean because people will think my work are too expensive and they don't want to hire me. So I think this is a major barrier for deep ocean observing. So I hope this perception will change in 10 years. So in order to do that, I think we need to better coordinate the observing effort as a global community. For instance, if we can coordinate available ship time opportunity among the international partner or certain observing technology, it may be possible to increase the global involvement of the deep ocean observing. And I think also we need to do a better job in terms of knowledge transfer. I think many observing tools are highly customized by specific institute. So sometimes it's not necessarily lack of money, but it's lack of the know-how prevent us to use the new technology. So I think we should promote more international collaboration, such as bringing technical personnel or observing technology on expedition of the international partner. Or we can have the international partner to bring their personnel on the deep sea expedition. So that's just my brief opinion. Thanks.
That's great. I can't believe you were discouraged from researching the deep ocean. It must change. All right, Amelia Bridges, you want to go next?
Cool, thank you. Can you hear me? Because my microphone seems to be, yeah, cool. Brilliant, yeah, so I'll introduce myself again. My name is Amelia. I have just finished my PhD at the University of Plymouth and have started a postdoc here, working on all things model, basically. And I think if I had to pick 3 words to describe what I wanted to see in deep sea observing in 10 years' time, it would be collaborative, coordinated, and communicated. So I think a fundamental point of models is to be able to predict. So aligning, the present day with future needs and societal requirements and things, it is literally what it's all about. And ultimately, I think collaboration, coordination, and communication will be the three things that either facilitate success or failure. So I think ensuring that we come together as a global community, and it ties back to what Chi Lin was saying then, and what Telmo was doing with this accessible piece of equipment, that if we don't all band together, then we're just making it harder for everyone, is my kind of thought on the matter. And I think that's where programs like DOS, initiatives like DOSI, Challenger 150, all tie together, because there needs to be such a diverse range of voices around the table in 10 years' time. As many people have said, it's been the same people for too long, and the same biases in those voices. So yeah, I think that's where it should be in 10 years' time.
That's awesome. Very inspirational. All right, Brennan. All right, Brennan, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I was just in the last panel, so you probably all know me. I'm at the University of Rhode Island. I'm a deep sea roboticist, technologist with interest in distributed sensing and low-cost electronics, low-cost sensors and that sort of thing.
And where do you wish to see deep sea observing in 10 years?
Sorry, sorry, I just figured if I just introduced myself, I didn't have to go too far with it. Where do I envision things going? I have to answer a question too. Where do I envision things going in the next 10 years? Well, I mean, basically the two topics that I'm probably the most expertise in. I see things getting a lot more democratized with low-cost sensing and low-cost technology. Stumble on that word there, but I think you get the idea of what I'm talking about. So I think we'll see a lot more things widespread. And I think that's really a major trend. We're seeing a lot of people working on that, including myself. And I really would like to see fiber optics get to be used a lot more for both acoustics and temperature sensing for long-term spatiotemporal monitoring. So that's near and dear to my heart. I think that is the future.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Laura,
Sure.
You're up.
Okay, so well, again, just brief introduction again, if you want. I'm a postdoc at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I mean, I just mainly actually wanted to add one thing to all the things that have been said, and in terms of course, making like observations more accessible to like in general. I'm actually also a big advocate in just like maintaining the structures which we have, because they have already costed a lot of money, and that's not always granted. But supporting like funding agencies are willing like to continue such a race, and those are fundamental to answer some scientific questions, especially like how to separate like climate trends from like just like a variability, which again with deep ocean is still like one of the big unknowns. So again, like the rapid array, for example, to study like the meridional Botany circulation in the Atlantic was one great example. Like we talked already like about the Argo program and all like those spin-offs and the new ones that are coming up. So yeah, so one thing in terms of that definitely I would like to see in the next 10 years is to see like this being continued, because it would definitely help again resolve addressing questions in terms of like the role of the ocean in transporting, for example, like so sequestering like anthropogenic heat and carbon, and regulating like the in general the ocean heat content. So yeah, that's one thought to put there.
That's great. Thank you. And just a reminder to our audience to please submit any questions that you have through the Q&A, and we'll get to those. I thought you guys' answers were awesome. They're very inspiring, because it wasn't that what we needed in the future was a flying car. It's what we needed in the future was to make sure that everyone came to the table and that they were enabled and they were brought together in order to answer these questions. And it's like that graph that we all see where the number of single person publications has gone down and the number of publications with many, many co-authors has risen. So I guess my question to you, and maybe there is no answer to it, but how do we do that? how do we make that future happen in 10 years? Yeah, go ahead, Amelia.
Just to clarify, your question was, how do we implement, like, what's the pathway here? Yeah.
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 How do we implement? We want to say, oh yeah, we want to democratize data, democratize science. We want to collaborate. We want to make sure that developing countries are brought to the table and people across the board can feel like they can have access to becoming scientists and all of those things. So how do we do it?
I think this is where communication comes in. I mean, and SciComm effectively. So we live in a world and the internet is becoming more accessible. And I mean, I've pretty much always grown up with the internet. I don't really remember a time before the internet. And it's, I mean, it opens up a whole new world, doesn't it? So, you know, you have access to, as someone said, the pandemic, maybe the silver lining is that we're all so used to Zoom now, even though we still have technical issues and everything, but we're still so used to it. So we've got this platform with which to communicate to other people with, and I think we have to take that opportunity. And having really strong leaders of, maybe, you know, this is the early career panel, so the kind of academic generation above us, there are some really strong people and groups pushing for that collaborative effort, you know, through DOSI, through Challenger 150. So I think ultimately it's up to them to inspire us to then take that forward in 10 years' time, as you say. But the key to it all is communication, and it's getting easier because of globalization, which is also causing the problem. But anyway, that's a different catch-22.
Awesome. Does anyone else want to take a stab at that roadmap? What does that look like?
I mean, I'll jump in the pool and say that I think it definitely needs to include an educational component to it, whether that's at secondary ed or at the college level or all of that. That's going to basically involve a lot more people and scientists, you know, whether they consider them citizen scientists or amateurs, whatever, however you put that. It's going to involve more people in the community and make it broader. And as a result, the demand for example, low-cost sensors and that low-cost technology, that's going to incentivize companies to sell to that market and create, you have to create the market that they'll start selling to. So I think that there's a major pathway to involve a much broader user base besides really people here. We're all experts and career scientists in this. We need to broaden that as much as possible. How do we do that? I'm not quite sure. We can have another discussion or get into it a little bit now, but yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. And I think a lot of this is by showing that we want to do this and by expressing an interest in doing that. I think that's the first step. And like Amelia was saying, it takes leadership from the top to help us get there. But now that we're pushing to have that be done, I think that we're on our way. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I completely agree with that point. And I'd just like to add to that, that to how you were asking before, Leslie, how we can bring people to the table. And I think this is already something that is happening in the decade. It's not probably the mainstream. It's not the mainstream yet. But the DOOS is a great example. The ECO program, so the early career program, is a great example. There's an empowering women program that has also been endorsed. So there are different aspects that are already coming together. And I think collaborating with those people and really building a strong community can then also trace this pathway towards more mainstreaming of more collaborative efforts.
That's great. Thank you, guys. And to the audience, don't forget to submit any questions. And any of the panelists, you guys can also ask these early career folks any questions. So one of the things one of our main questions for the group, we'll loop back on that, is this idea of better coordinating observing efforts to leverage shared assets. So that kind of stems across what we've been talking about bringing people to the table, but it's a more concrete thing. So what do you guys have thoughts about that? So this would be the idea that we have ships out there, we have infrastructure out there kind of to Laura's point about leveraging stuff that we already have and maintaining stuff we already have. So what do you guys think would be the best ways that we can do that? And these are really hard questions. So Laura, do you still have your hand raised from the other one, or? Okay.
It's clearly very difficult.
I know, it's going to, right? And well, and I think one of the things this starts with is, I mean, I think it was your point about DOSI and Challenger 150 and Deuce, is that we're trying to have these conversations. I think the first question is, well, what's out there and what does it do? And then where are the gaps? And then trying to figure out how to fill them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think someone earlier on mentioned about like maintaining systems and equipment it goes to as well that we've already got, because, you know, a lot of the time it costs millions of dollars and whatnot. But I think also if we can promote that kind of low cost equipment as well, it almost makes it easier to share. Do you know what I mean? So I know, like, you know, Diva Amon was doing stuff in Trinidad and Tobago with like drop cameras with GoPros and stuff, and we've done some work in St. Helena with like similar equipment, and just really trying to, yeah, democratize and make science a bit cheaper. You know, like what Chilin was saying about someone told you not to tell anyone that you did deep sea because it's too expensive. And that's genuinely something I've worried about as well as an early career. You know, like I see friends working on inshore ecosystems and I'm like, wish I could just hire a boat one day and go and collect some samples, but it's not that easy. But I think there are ways to make it easier. I just don't think it's been quite closed shop for quite a long time. And what we're all saying is it just needs to be a little bit more open.
Yeah, and I think that really lends itself out, just looking at our last question, to best align our research trajectories today to align for the societal needs tomorrow. So it sounds like the trajectory we need to be on right now is democratization, open sourcing, trying to innovate to make things cheaper, to make things more accessible. And this idea, Brennan, you mentioned in an earlier panel about, well, what if we just open source all of our designs? And I understand that some of this stuff is really complicated. I mean, sometimes I can barely make some of these Lego sets that are coming out now, you know, but they're not going to get any easier if you only have one person working on them, right? I don't know if you want to speak more to open sourcing designs at all.
Well, I think that there has to be a balance that needs to be struck. We all want things to be open source as scientists, but we have to recognize that if we're going to rely on a commercial sector to innovate and manufacture, because scientists don't manufacture at scale. We need to accept that, and we need companies to do that kind of thing. So there has to be some way for companies to make a profit. We have to accept that too. So there's a way to do open source with an asterisk. You know, make it open, make it accessible, but allow companies to have some way to make a profit off of that, and accept that as being part of that. At least I do, and I have sympathy for companies that need to, you know, in order to survive, they have to have some way that they have to have some sort of bait, you know, so not bait, but you know, they have to have some way to profit from that.
Right. All right, Justin, you got your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to interject here because I think it was timely. There was a question in the Q&A. The panel was asked, where do we see deep ocean observing in 10 years? I'm wondering if the panel can talk a bit about where do they wish to see deep ocean observing in 10 years, considering FAIR data principles. FAIR here stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable.
And we should know that this question came from Stace Liu at Hui, and she is also on the IDOS program, and she will be training all of our doers on data. So where do you guys wish to see data in the next 10 years? Go ahead, Amelia.
I don't want to hog all the mic time. So exactly as you described it, what was it? Fair, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. I think that literally sums it up. That's what we need. But I think one of the inherent challenges to that is data embargoes, and it's publish or perish, right? That's the kind of, whether you like it or not, that's the view that a lot of people have. So how do we get to, I'm kind of turning the question back, like, how do we get to a point where we can share our data and make it publicly available and ultimately allow other researchers to use it, whilst also protecting a lot of the career drivers that, are inherently built into academia, rightly or wrongly? How do we do that? I don't know. Do you get rid of like data embargoes, or do you just tell people to hurry up and write the papers that they said they were going to write? Or I don't know. I don't know if anyone else has any idea on how to do that either.
Well, that's the incentivization piece that I think Adam was talking about in terms of tech, right? It's, oh, you got this many publications, but no one cares how many people are using your tech. And similarly, no one cares how many people are using your data set. They just care how many pubs you have. And so if someone scooped you, and so it's reworking that incentivization process. Yeah. All right, Laura, go ahead.
Reacting to what Amelia just said, I think this is such an important point, that the culture in academia tends to be very competitive. And in industry, of course, there are pre-competitive groups, but beyond that, a lot of the industry reality is also still super competitive. And so it's probably necessary, and competition, of course, has its key values. It's a major component also of innovation, but then there must be places, so probably safe spaces, where we don't have this competition, where it's possible to create, where it's possible to have possibly a space where it's where you can share data without having necessarily the issue of being de-incentivized because you might reduce your career possibilities in the future or so. So these are probably things that work together, but it's, so on the one hand, the incentives for career building, that is very important for early careers. But on the other hand, also this aspect of just having a less competitive and a more collaborative mindset. I think those two definitely interweave to be thinking about making such these data available in the first place, and not keeping them within embargoes, as is done nowadays a lot of times.
Oh, that's great. It's almost like what Brennan was saying about we want companies to share their designs, but we have to provide an incentive for them to do so. And so it's the same incentivization for data. I want to switch gears slightly. Oh, Pradeep, your hand's up. I wanted to ask you some specific questions, but I'm going to let you talk first.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to also add that, I think there are also, there's also room to sort of, I think was touched upon also, to sort of add, incentives and make, sort of, the sharing of data also profitable for everyone, as Laura was saying. And there's also sort of, regulatory or legal means to sort of also do this. And I think we had a presentation in the first panel about the International Seabed Authority, and within the International Seabed Authority regime, for instance, there's this requirement to share environmental data, for instance, that are collected by contractors. And then this environmental data needs to be sort of uploaded into an open access database called Deep Data. And so, through legal requirements as well, this sort of, data sort of sharing requirements can be sort of compelled in this case. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So Pradeep, you come to this panel with a very interesting perspective. We've talked a lot about bringing people to the table, and one group of people we haven't talked about is Indigenous communities. So I was wondering if you could speak to bringing Indigenous communities to the table for deep ocean observing, because I know you've worked with a lot of them in your home country of Malaysia.
Yeah, I think it's difficult also at the same time. I've worked with Indigenous communities back home and also in New Zealand. And when you speak to them about the ocean, they have a totally different perspective than most of us do. They are connected with the ocean. It's spiritual for them. sort of a thing. And when I sort of try to ask them questions like, okay, but how far out are you talking about? And they just say, I can't explain to you, it's just that the whole ocean is connected to me, sort of a thing. So indeed, I think, we sort of need to explore ways to sort of bring traditional knowledge and into sort of, the sort of deep ocean observing strategies that we make. We also need to find ways to bring traditional communities, indigenous people into various sort of, international fora to allow them to sort of also, put on the table their perspectives about things. And I guess in this respect, together with Lisa and some other colleagues, we recently also issued a DOSI policy brief in this respect on, in relation to the deep ocean as well. So yeah, I think it's very important. I think we are far from there yet, but I think we're making small steps, and eventually we will, sort of, come closer to where we hope to be.
That's great, thank you. So we have 3 minutes left on our panel. So I wanted to get some closing thoughts from you guys. So as you know, this fall, we're gonna be starting the Doers program. So kind of any closing thoughts that you guys have about how we can best elevate early career people, and specifically within the Doers program, because these are things that we could be able to implement for how to best bring early career people together.
Okay, I'll jump in. From my perspective, I'm early career and I have students, right? So in my career, I'm a professor and I'm at a university, so I have students. And what really motivates the students are challenges and competitions and that type of thing. And I think it came up on a chat, or maybe Lisa mentioned it out loud about an X Prize, focused on deep ocean observing and that type of thing. That really resonates amongst the people that I work with.
That would be super cool.
Yeah.
Other perspectives? Yeah, go ahead, Amanda.
Helping people build networks, I think, is really important. And I mean, I have done some stuff with DOSI, and through it, we're working on this incredible paper that addresses like a really important community issue in deep sea research and deep sea ecology. But would I have had the confidence to seek out those people individually? No, but being given a platform that allows you to go, yeah, I'm interested too, and be it a Google Doc or whatever, it gives you the confidence to kind of put yourself forward for things that maybe you wouldn't if you were stood in a room. Go, yeah, no, I'll definitely do that, that's absolutely fine, kind of thing. So I think the platform is really helpful, and putting us in contact with eminent people. You can sometimes get a bit, I don't know about anyone else, but like academic fangirling is a thing. Like people like, oh my God, they've published so many amazing papers, I love their work, blah, blah. Oh, I'm never going to go and talk to them. So, and it takes a while to get over that, and you do, but yeah, I think that would be super helpful.
That's amazing. So it's breaking through that wall.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, just to jump on Amelia's point about, you mentioned papers, right? Putting papers as open source is something we all want to do, but a lot of the journals charge for that. So having fun, like ways to draw on funds to make your work open source, that's really great, especially for early career, I think.
And the more collaborators you have, the more likely it is that one of your collaborators has some pot somewhere, at one of their institutions or whatever. And I know, the big journals are making lots of contracts with universities at the moment about OA and stuff. So.
And then, sorry, just last thought to jump in. I mean, use international conferences, like, of course, as platforms to connect people. That has always been done, but, specific town halls and so on, that's not always the most inclusive because of the cost that they have, but it's definitely also another way to include the more early career researchers, which should just be kept in mind.
Great. Chilin, do you have any last thoughts? Oh, go ahead, Pradeep. Yep.
Just very quickly, and I guess also mentoring programs would also help. So pairing early career with senior or mid-level researchers. That's it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. Good, Chilin.
Yeah, I totally agree with everybody says about the network. So I remember when I did my PhD, I was involved with the census of marine life. So there are many connections I made during that period of time still benefit me until this day. So I would definitely think to have this kind of opportunity for students will be very beneficial. And the many friends I made at the time we're still working together. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Amelia, Bravo, do you have any last thoughts?
For me, yes, I will say that it's the same that you already mentioned. I don't have any new thoughts, sorry.
Great. And then, and Laura, any last thoughts?
I agree with like all the points that just came up now. I think they're fantastic. The networking aspect is a key component. Probably what I would add to that is this possibilities for transdisciplinary working, also because DOSI has this link to policy. So probably that would be a very interesting link, because I think a lot of us share this urge to wanting to have impact in their work, and probably that could be one valuable venue. And the mentoring aspect is one key aspect, and I know that DOS has the ambition to also include, to have early careers going along with their decision making, or providing the decision making. And I think that is something extremely valuable that will help, get the next generation of scientists ready also to take over the deep ocean observing that is going to happen in the next couple of years.
That's great. Well, thank you guys so much. It was so awesome to chat with you guys today, and especially folks who were on the first panel and stayed through to the last panel. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to transition this now over to Patrick, who's our PI on the IDES project, and he's going to close us out.
Sure. Well, in the last minute and a half or so, this has been an amazing panel with really amazing panelists. I hope the audience enjoyed it. And I will just reuse Amelia Bridges' words to say collaborate, coordinate, and communicate. And the decade provides that opportunity now. And in particular, I'd like to point you again to, for those who don't know yet, the IDES program. We actually have now funding from the National Science Foundation to actually realize some of these themes that Leslie presented at the outset. And I really urge you to engage with IDES if you haven't done yet. So of course, there is a core team of IDES people, but this is just a core team. We really seek broad participation to bring in all the diverse voices, to really make progress, to bring in ideas, to bring in the early career scientists, and to promote the early career scientists, give them the voice that they would like to hear. So you find the information here on the slide, info@deepoceanobserving.org. And I think time's up. So thank you so much, Leslie, for organizing the session. Thank you for everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of the UN Decade Lab.